Okay, we're live. Hey, we got Comic Perch, uh, Dave, and we got Jim Fear talking about bringing new readers into comic books. The comic book market has been it's been shrinking for decades now. Like it originally back in the early days, you had Superman and selling like a million books an issue, whereas today it's kind of
They're
you
lucky to get 300K.
oh, are you kidding? That'd be amazing to see a book get 300K. You're lucky to get 100K.
Well, I mean, I've been looking at the like Comixology reports. Not Comixology. What is it? Comicron. That's it. Comicron. I've been looking at the Comicron reports for the past few months, and like all of the top, it's like the top 3 or maybe 4 books sell 100K, and it's mostly been DC stuff and like their flagship shit, like Batman or the Justice League or
Yeah,
stuff like that. And if Marvel gets a book in there, then it's like the Spectacular Spider-Man or something.
they did have a couple of years ago. They did have Rocket Raccoon in that one sold 200,000 copies or so, but that was because Loot Crate bought the first issue.
Right.
We are gonna have one more guest join us. I thought he wasn't gonna come, but he did make it. So
Sounds great. Well, thanks for setting us up.
Oh, here we go.
here you go. Bill, you there? We're already live. I'll give him a minute to set up his mic. Anyway, Dave, you hadn't said anything. Introduce yourself. Grams.
I think he's AFK.
No, I wasn't AFK. I was just getting the word out. Gotta put out some seeds. Gotta make sure that the cherry blossoms are blooming. I was gonna say that yes, Grams Barnaby is the pen name. Long time various listener, and Intel Mueller, third or fourth time live stream caller.
Awesome. We already got a viewer. Hey, Cody Con. Oh, we lost Bill. Well, he'll be back.
Maybe he's having the same problem I did.
Yeah.
Has he tried turning his microphone off and on again?
So anyway, the oh, here we go. He's back. Can you hear us? Oh, let me type in the chat. Can you hear us? But anyway, it's clear that for the comic book industry to survive, new readers have to be brought into. They have to be brought into the market. They need to become customers. Like, I really do believe that at this point, there is enough of an audience for comics, or a potential audience for comics, that you could be having sales like up there with even stuff like Lord of the Rings, maybe. The really millions and millions of copies sold. I think Hunger Games has barely been out a few years and it's sold like 40 million copies. I think there is a similar market for comic books. It's just that no one's been able to tap into that yet.
Or, if I may suggest, and we might end up doing this with our little discovery later tonight, is that the market has always been there, but it's like the argument between domestic American car owners in the 90s versus a lot of the folks who were buying the Japanese imports. Hint, hint. And keep in mind, my experience with comics buying up here in the glorious land of Kazakhstan might be a lot more strange and unique, because we had various avenues and access to content in a way, because the eastern coast of our country and parts of central Canada and up until Manitoba have francophone communities. We could tap into other European comic. We were tapping into other European comics in a way that I think some parts of the American Midwest, it would just look like it would just seem maybe kind of alien to some extent. But we'll discuss that a bit later on tonight.
Yeah. Okay, so comic perch. You've talked about how you're running the comic store. Like, so what kind of books do you sell there? Just Big Two stuff or anything else?
Yeah, we sell everything. I mean, so I've had a comic store off and on for almost 30 years. Actually, it's hard to think about it in that much time. But I had a shop, closed the shop, went in to do some other things, made some money, decided to then lose that money on running a shop again. So we carry a little bit of everything.
There we are.
Hey,
the camera's on.
Yeah, man.
Okay. Whatever.
Actually,
Well, he looks incredibly swag tonight.
Here, I'm gonna have to turn the bandwidth down myself.
Yeah, camera's off now. I can actually probably
There we
check
go.
better. Yep.
There we go.
Let's adjust bandwidth audio, level for audio only. All right. So what's going on?
I was about to say, first of all, now that we all know your secret identity, we have to go through the 5-story multi-plot arc about how you had to go and see Alice Cooper as the trickster in order to remove the memory of us seeing you hold that swag on the air.
oh dear God.
Alice Cooper
But, yeah.
as the trickster. Hold the fuck up. I don't see that happening. Oh, there's a Templar. All right.
Okay.
So
Stealth Chainsaw in the chat says we need to lower the cost or just up the value in general.
Well,
of
I think before I would even jump to that, let's hear more from the comic store owner, and I'm just going to be curious to see when you started off,
Sure.
like when they began the non-returnable market. How did that initially feel to you back in the day?
Well, it was risky. I mean, look, I think you look at the eras. I think the 90s, I mean, it's been said to death, but the 90s were an easy time to be in the business. You could go in, you could have a very focused comic store, you could over-order, and you could deal with some of the consequences of titles not coming in and people abandoning their shops and everything else. But there was a really good draw to get people in who were collectors, who wanted to get the comics, and it was easy. So there was a lot of problems in the industry that were certainly there, but you had a very willing audience. You had a price point that worked. You didn't have the kind of digital distractions and other things you have now, so it covered up a lot of the real problems. And then as the market, the bubble burst, because like anything, a lot of the collectors were there for a fad and they vanished, and comic stores had overcommitted themselves. Then all the problems that were always there kind of came in. The lack of returnability hurt. The fact that Diamond is very flaky in terms of what they give you in hurts.
oh, don't do not get me started on those cocksuckers. Okay.
No, sure. People who followed me this week know that they screwed me pretty good this week. So that was a 48 hours for me to get my number one seller for the week, which was shipped to another store. But
Wonderful.
thankfully, I'm in a community here where there's a lot of shops, and with the exception of just a tiny handful, everybody helps each other out. So I've been in other markets where somebody gets the wrong box and they hoard it. So we're a decent amount up here. But the problem that you've got is you've got a bunch of different factors going against it all at once. You have the price point is too high for casual people to just come in. It is. It's interesting about Marvel, because that's where a lot of the conversation goes right now about trying to attract new readers. In a way, they clearly are, but there's two major problems in their approach. They're hiring creative teams just for pennies, so they're not getting the best talent. So think about it: if you're trying to attract a new reader in from a new market who doesn't know comics, or trying to get collector in for the first time, in the 90s, you had Mark Silvestri, you had Jim Lee, you had Rob Liefeld, you had Todd McFarlane, you had all these, superstar artists putting out books. So if you're new, you're coming in, you were getting something very relevant. Cool. Today, you come in, you try something new. It's from a B artist who's getting paid peanuts, basically.
Yeah, that's definitely noticeable because Marvel under Ike Perlmutter is kind of following the sort of procedure that a lot of major media conglomerates work on, which is, hey, you could get... oh, wait, let's see if I can get the right Stanley voice for this. Hey, kids, you could get exposure!
That's very good.
That's kind of the whole shtick, because it's like, hey, you want to become a great reporter? Come here, work for us for nothing as an intern, and you will have exposure.
It got worse because the Disney is notoriously that way as a culture. So I mean, if you're old like me, you're in the 70s and 80s, a dream of kids, you go and you be a Disney animator. You go work in the big animation studio and you can do that. And then word got out that was a horrible job because you didn't get paid anything. And so you have already kind of a practice of cheapness from Ike, and then you get the acquisition by Disney, and yeah, there's no money there for talent. And so again, you're trying to attract a new audience. You want to put your best foot forward. If you go into a restaurant and they serve you at the worst table with the worst food right out the gate, you're probably not going to go back. So Marvel wants to attract new readers, but they're not putting that effort out. And simultaneously, and this is what hurts me as a comic shop owner, is rather than try and do new imprints or new lines or things out of continuity to attract those new readers, they go ahead and they pirate their existing IP, their existing line of comics. So now, in addition to putting subpar creators on, you're also taking comics, like you're taking the X-Men that's been out for decades, and you've got loyal followers who maybe don't like the title anymore, but they don't want to break their runs. They're just buying it month after month. And you're saying, oh, congratulations, we're going to go ahead and swap around a bunch of the characters and change them out of nowhere, put on these worst creators, because we want to appeal to the new market. And there's almost an arrogance that they expect that the old readers are just going to stay. That, you're just going to put up with it while we go chase this new audience. So both those factors together have been abysmal. It's a mess.
Now,
no, you're just racist. That's what it boils down to.
I mean, look, I think it's funny that's the gut for, that's the defense. But it's like, look, I've said before, and I've gotten a lot of people on the other side angry with me. Try these new books out by all means. I don't. There is a new audience out there. Go for it, but don't simultaneously chop off your base while doing this new thing. That's crazy.
Well, that's the thing about this whole audience thing that I've noticed a lot, because I don't have a lot of money to go and buy comics every month, but I do watch some of the comics YouTubers who do, and they review these comics. And something that I've noticed with this is that the new audience that they're targeting are mainly like college kids in America. Yeah. And when I say college kids in America, I mean like the crazy leftists, not like the kid who's just trying to get his degree and study for finals and shit like that. So when they go after these people, they're trying to do more like artsy comic books, and they're trying to have all these high-minded. They're trying to have all these high-minded ideals and have stories that mean something. Which I remember when I got into comic books way back when I was a little kid, I wasn't looking for commentaries on racism or anything like that. I wanted to watch Spider-Man fight the Lizard in downtown Manhattan. That was what I wanted to see. I wanted to see superheroes fight the bad guys and win. And if there's moral lessons in there, then that's fine. You can do that. But the primary thing needs to be having fun, because kids don't care about your fucking commentary on racism. They're going to read that shit and then they're going to get bored and they're not going to ask their parents to buy them the next issue.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, my shop is up in, if it's not the number one, the number two far left area of the country. It's in the Seattle area. That's my clientele, but they're not buying these books either. And that's the big lie. It's not like, all the racists are just keeping those guys out of the comic shop. Not at all. I mean, I sell tons of Saga. I love it when Saga comes out every month, because I sell a lot of copies of it. And that's fine. A lot of people hate it, and that's okay too. But I got people that come in and buy it. The challenge though is if you're saying we're going to appeal to these college kids, we're going to go after this market. And I talked to another reseller, Comics Pro, last year around this. And the answer is, well, look, all the attention is going to Tumblr, it's going to Twitter, and this is what the content people want. And that may be true, But the big difference there is that the audience that's on Tumblr looking at art and going that, they're not paying anything. That's free. That audience is getting that content for nothing. So now if what you want to try and do is take this, put it in a print medium, and charge $4 a month for it, you're not going to get that Tumblr audience. They're used to paying nothing. So what market are you going for exactly? It just makes no sense at all.
Also, appealing to Tumblr in the first place is just a fucking mistake right off the bat.
Because they don't care about fucking comics. I mean, here's the thing. I remember when everyone made a big to-do about fucking Power Girl's boob window. And then fucking DC and the New 52 said, okay, we heard you. We're going to change your costume for this World's Finest book with Huntress. And none of the people that bitched, whined, and moaned about the fucking boob window bother to even step out of their fucking, cave on Tumblr and actually buy the goddamn book. These people, it seems like Marvel and DC are appealing to people that aren't even interested in the fucking medium.
Well,
I mean, it's kind of like Miller said about Daredevil. They're looking for kids that aren't fucking there.
Yeah, I mean that audience is there, but they don't pay. They don't want to buy anything. I mean, that's there's people who love that content, no doubt about it.
Oh no, that audience that they're chasing are the kind of assholes who will step into the comic book shop, look around at the new Marvel title, and then just read it. And then when you ask them
content.
And may I finish, please? And when you actually go up to them and say, "Oh, hey, you check this out," and try and make some recommendations to close the fucking sale. Oh, I'm only reading this ironically. Fuck you.
Actually, there's one interesting thing that I'm going to ask, because while we're talking a lot about comics, as I say, my experience up here in Canada is a bit different than maybe some of you guys in the States. Because for me, up here in Canada, the comics shopping experience is very, very different. And I say that because of the French culture that we have here. Our country has like a great second run. We're like a second run drop off for so many French bande dessinée comics and whatnot. So sometimes it was easier. So sometimes we have, I think, more of a comics going audience, say on the French side, or in a lot of French communities, simply because we've had the tradition of easy to purchase bande dessinées. You can get them in the libraries and borrow them. You can, go down to any bookstore and trip over, everything from, say, the Galaxian stuff to historical period pieces by Hugo. And it's just like all this content of this high quality is readily available, but at a dirt cheap price if you're willing to learn French. It's astounding, even including sometimes reprints of the American stuff at a drop down price. But that's because once you're outside of that market, it's second run gravy. The other thing that I'm also wondering about is, as you're a comic store owner, one thing I'm very interested in is that the 90s had a whole variety of booms and busts, but what is your take on, say, the Tokyo Pop manga explosion that happened in the 90s and ran until the early aughts? Like, how did that affect the sort of audiences that you were starting to also notice come into the comic shops?
That's a good question. I think it's easy to call it a fad. I don't think that's right, but you can. There's a new piece of content came out. The distribution channel was suddenly there, so people could find it. I mean, there was a lot of interest in manga. I'd say prior to Tokyo Pop getting their act together basically doing what they did, not getting their act together. But it was just too hard to get. So adding that distribution channel brought a lot of new readers in, and I think the way animation and a couple other things, the whole culture kind of grew a bit. What's interesting about it is I found that a lot of the readers that would come in and request that content would quickly kind of catch on to the fact that the material coming over was old, or at least it was faster to get. If you could get it from Japan, you were going to get it faster. And so I would watch every customer go through this cycle of getting hooked, getting books, ordering things regularly, discovering some channel where they could get it somehow from Japan themselves, and just kind of bypassing the middleman, if you will, and going there. And I think as it became easier and easier to do that, a lot of comic shops saw, at least in the States, saw a drop of that content when it just became obvious that what you're getting was old and you could catch up if you went direct. So I think we still sell plenty of it. I mean, it's a healthy market here. We have obviously a very heavy Asian community in the Seattle area, so it's popular here. But it's kind of this known secret that we're getting stuff delayed, and if you could somehow get to Japan, it would be easier. And that's easier and harder through the years.
I mean, part of the reason why I guess maybe I should clarify a few things. That the reason why I kind of bring up the Tokyo Pop boom is, yes, we had Studio Proteus doing a lot of high-end translation work throughout the 80s when they were under Eclipse, and eventually when they oh man, I forget the name of the translator, but he later on set up Studio Proteus under Dark Horse. But the reason why I sort of say I refer to the Tokyo Pop boom was because I feel that when Tokyo Pop really exploded in the 90s, and I was kind of experienced it, there was a huge influx of female readers that I think maybe next to, say, some of the work that, say, Neil Gaiman and I think was it the female editor who used to run Vertigo?
Catherine, shit, I can't remember the name of her name right off the top of my head.
Yeah. But it was sort of like, the reason why I bring up the Tokyo Pop stuff was because Tokyo Pop, at least when I was purchasing some of their series back then, is they had a very perfect form and function price-wise. Because one of the problems that we have up here in Canada is that the French bande dessins that we get are reasonably priced for the format and what you're buying and purchasing. They mostly sell basically as, these nice big little boutique sort of graphic novels. And the thing is, with the floppies up here in Canada, they were always overpricing them in the same way that some publishers would just abuse the exchange rates and overprice books.
Yeah.
So when Tokyo Pop came along, their pricing was actually quite reasonable. It was like maybe only $1 or so difference between in exchange between the U.S. and American dollar. And on top of that, the books were of a nice compact form. You could fit one of these buggers in your pocket or in a jacket or so, and you could whip it out and read it anywhere. Much easier than, say, a floppy. It was like you were having this small miniature paperback. And relatively speaking, price-wise at the time, you could see a lot of girls just buying this stuff, and it's like, well, it's $9.99 American, but it's like, the printing isn't all that great. Even the quality of the translations were sometimes questionable because they were just like boom, 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 boom. We gotta pump these series out as soon as we got the license, and we gotta throw this up on the shelf right now. And in doing so, they even have a distinct branding on the spine, so you kind of knew, which series you were picking up as opposed to the floppies. So,
yep.
The reason why I consider that boom kind of important and significant is because it should have been a teachable lesson to. In
so many ways, man.
Yeah,
you have no idea. So that is so accurate. They had, and I knew several of the people involved by name, still keep in touch with, and they've moved on from comics. This is a group of people that had a really smart marketing plan. They knew what they were doing with their distribution. And I don't know if you guys know this, but it is the first real pioneer of doing digital comics here in the US was Tokyo Pop. And their vision was to put digital comics carved up in a readable format on the cell phone. And this is pre-iPhone. This is like 2006. And they were putting their comics in digests on these old Razor flip phones and things. And their vision was 100% to grow new markets by trying these new things out and doing it in a very smart way. And it's funny because the Tokyo Pop work on those flip phones actually sold pretty well, did pretty well. There's just not a lot of people who realize about apps. And then they missed the mark when the iPhone came out. They were late, and then the app boom burst, and everybody was going there, and Tokyo Pop, and the fad was kind of going down at that point. People were a little less interested, but it was interesting how they did so many things right. And today, if you're a DC, you're Marvel, or you're Image, or you're even an indie publisher, I mean, the opportunity is so huge for a Dark Horse or one of these guys to just kind of change the way they're distributing and delivering comics and just run the table, because the market's ready for them. And the blueprint is what Tokyo Pop did. I fully believe it.
Yeah, and what's even more fascinating from my perspective, because this is another fun wrinkle about being in Kazakhstan land, is because we have a tighter connection to Europe, we used to get, for a long period of time in the 80s, we got access to all sorts of, not just the Bond to Sin market, we also had access to the English 80s and 70s comics market as well, especially with imprints like Thompson that would put out, their collected volumes of comic books. So it's like one of the things I have in my house is a copy of Warlord 84, and it's just this badass, hardback, cheap hardback book that's just about us. That was like taking a selection of some of the best of their war comics anthologies, and it's just about, it's just all these war comics set in World War II, World War I, other wars, and just and it was just like, as a kid, and I still keep it to this day because I was surprised, like, holy smack, the amount of value you would get out of this was kind of nuts for reading it. And the funny thing is, these were being sold at Woolworths, because we had them up here. So we had this connection to this English market. Like, we even had access, thanks to these British publishers using Canada as a second-run market. They would also give us sometimes these collected reprint books for 2000 AD. So we got a chance to experience everything from Judge Dredd all the way up to I think all the way up to stuff like the Ballad of Halo Jones, Rogue Trooper, and even some of the newer serials from the 80s at a tenth of the price. And these anthologies would sometimes be like 50 pages long, including the time twisters and all this stuff. So our experience, being, if you were a Canadian purchaser of comics, you get to see all these varieties in the marketplace of various different formats, and you get to see which all these unique formats that anybody in the States could choose to do if they wanted to. As I say, I think the reason why I always go back to, say, for the U.S., the Tokyo Pop boom being kind of important is because once that exploded, they had opened up a shelving space for graphic novels in your Barnes and Nobles. Yeah. And all of a sudden, what started off as just being this one page for a couple of collected copies and maybe an old copy of the Cowboy Wally show, all of a sudden, in a couple of years, you've moved down to like three or four like blocks of shelves with all these back catalogs, at least from the American side of things, showing up. So,
yeah, I remember when they just had like a little spinner rack that you might be lucky to find, and they had some Spider-Man books in it, some Spider-Man issues. I mean, not the trades.
And what's also interesting too is, while we're talking about this, is one of the big things with the graphic novel boom in the bookstores is one company that was really well poised and understood this, oddly enough, was DC, of all things. And that's because looking back at some stuff that I have purchased from a little comic shop from like a few years ago, when one of our comic shops kind of eventually closed down because there were other branches in another city, and the province basically said, we can only afford one branch, and we're going to close this one down here in this city. was looking through that through I think it was a book by Steve Gerber called Nevada. It's not really a good book, but I looked at the back catalog that they had there, and then I looked at a back catalog for another DC book, which was Frank Miller's Ronin, and then I would look at Camelot 3000, and even some of the other collected volumes that came out in the 90s. And what was interesting was DC knew and understood how to keep a consistent back catalog in print.
Yep.
And that is immensely huge in retaining people, because one big flaw that I feel that, and this is something that really seemed to be pushed under Ike Perlmutter of all things, which is not surprising. He's a freaking cheapskate of a manager. Is Marvel doesn't really do much in encouraging the reprints of their back catalog anymore. And
yeah,
that's
you guys remember when they actually put out their essential trades, everything in black and white?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got a few of those.
Yeah.
I've got my fucking Moon Knight, essential Moon Knight hanging out here, dude.
It's interesting though, because Marvel definitely they don't love that title.
What, Moon Knight?
No. I'm sorry. The essentials. So it's, if you go and you go to some of these conventions, the essential line is something that they kind of look down on as a mistake, or it's not something they heavily support.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Hey,
just checking. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about back catalogs, I just find it rather interesting and kind of hilarious that comics have been around for a lot longer than video games, and yet even video game companies are starting to realize, oh wow, all those old games for IPs and shit we bought up back in the 90s for a song, oh, we can resell those and they'll be profitable enough to justify doing that and even remaking them, you say? And yet here we are, and DC and Marvel are sitting on a venerable gold mine that they don't even want to touch.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there. DC gets it. They put out their back catalog. They've had a consistent back catalog, I think, since the mid-'80s.
Okay,
I wonder
where's my reprint of the Kyle Rayner run of Green Lantern?
Yeah, that's true. Some things they've done a really good job of constantly keeping in print, like Watchmen. You know?
Oh yeah, they'll never let Watchmen go out of print. Are you kidding?
I fucking wonder why they keep Watchmen around.
It's almost as if someone at DC just wants to watch Alan Moore suffer.
I read.
Yes.
I had the misfortune of actually laying my eyeballs upon the first two issues of Doomsday Clock, and I like Jeff Johns' work. A dude knows how to fucking write. So I'm confused by what I saw. It's kind of like being raped by your husband, who has been so kind and tender to you for 20 years. And then suddenly he busts out a spiked condom and shoves it in your ass with no lube.
Actually, I have a very interesting theory about Doomsday Clock. My theory about Doomsday Clock is that Jeff Johns was sort of given a mission once there were certain heads at Warner Brothers that said, "No, we gotta compete against the Marvel Films division." Okay, that's cool. So what about paying out these artists and authors? And it's like, you could just know there were some scumbag Steves in the audience of the corporate audience of that company that looked at Jeff Johns, gave him a 1,000-yard stare, and Jeff Johns' soyest instincts kicked in. And it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Here's what you're going to do. We need you to destroy most of the creator-owned stuff that was built up in the 80s so that it all works under one imprint. It's not a coincidence that they pretty much trashed and burned all of Vertigo once Grant Morrison wanted to get his superhero kicks in.
Yeah, I mean, like that shit didn't even work for Wildstorm back in the day. Like, I love Wildstorm comics. I've got a fucking collection of things like Wetworks and what was it? Gen 17, I think is the name of the comic, and
yeah.
Gen 13, that was it, and fucking Wildcats and shit like that. Like I got the whole original run of Wildcats, and every time I go through this comic, it's always like you'll get 4 or 5 issues in, and then it's like, hey, this character that you've never heard of shows up and he kicks this guy's ass, and this story continues in, you know, this 4-issue miniseries, or this story is continued in Wetworks number 13 or whatever. You know, and that shit didn't even work for Wildstorm. They still had to sell out to DC and become an imprint, and eventually that folded too.
Yeah, but as I say, this was all purposeful because Wildstorm was creator owned, and what changed was the tone. Look, the thing is, when the weird thing about the history of DC Comics is, if you've ever read Men of Tomorrow, which is a very interesting book about the history of the comics industry, is that, let's put it this way, a good chunk of the print media market in New York City, it's more than just echoes. There's a lot of dirty gangster business that sort of ran the magazine and the periodical markets for a very long period of time.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of...
I'm a huge fan of this man's tenure at Marvel as EIC, but let's be perfectly honest, Shooter ran his shit like a fucking mobster.
He did. And that's kind of... It's sort of like one of the things I've mentioned to some friends, as I said, you know, one of the most hilarious things that I find funny is how SJW / the socialists, the champagne socialist crowd, likes to endlessly lie about how comic sales were in the 80s, and it's like, no, you're wrong. You know, Marvel's X-Men under Chris Claremont, but namely under Jim Shooter, basically he ran such a good ship that basically X-Men made Chris Claremont millions. Okay, like he was able to get a private jet. If you rent a private jet if he needed to. Like, that's how much money a lot of these comics were being sold under Jim Shooter. And Jim Shooter basically is responsible for most Gen Xers, like, 80s nostalgia. Okay? Stuff like Jem, you know, the Transformers, G.I. Joe. That's because he knew a lot about how to get these comics tied in with like other products to sort of set up their backstories and shit, and to get things sold. So, you know, that's a big thing. The only downside is Jim Shooter ran a tight ship, and because he ran a tight ship, he didn't like prima donnas or creators trying to get uppity in his face, because he said, look, man, we're here to... The way our periodical system works, we're here to get the product out. You know, that's what kind of matters. You know, and we're here to raise new talent in our, you know, within our borders, so they can continue to put out something of consistency. That's not to say that the creator-owned movement that started up in the 80s didn't have legit complaints. Those are legit complaints, and to some extent, at least DC tried to answer them to some extent, but posts, I think, you know, once Karen Berger and, you know, folks like, you know,
Karen,
Shelley, yeah, you know, once Karen Berger like left the roost, or even some folks like Heidi McDonald, who sort of were running things at Vertigo, left, basically, once they had to start wanting to compete with like Marvel's media empire, you know, the boardroom just turned around and said, okay, we're going to fold all these imprints in. They're all going to be stuck under one DC universe. We're going to pay the creators more, but seriously, we really don't want to have a repeat of the Alan Moore incidents and crap during
and
the 80s.
Yet they fucking hired Bob Harris, who ran Marvel into the fucking ground.
Well, that's the downside about New York literati circles.
I mean,
they're tighter than a rabbit trap.
I mean, it's like a lot of the time, DC and Marvel are in a competition to see who can suck the hardest at times, who can make the dumbest decisions.
Yeah, I mean, Shooter ran his business like a business. He was a businessman. And I think that often clashed with a lot of artistic types who you're bringing into comics. I mean, the personalities were very, very different. But at the end of the day, you have to hand it to Shooter because he created a healthy enterprise. And that laid the groundwork for what we have now.
And on top of that, the man knew how to make sure quality was put out on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I mean, he saw every weakness. I mean, he would see a lack of quality or putting out a substandard product, and there were substandard products going out for sure, no doubt about it. But all the pieces, getting a distribution chain, getting quality up, all meant money. For him, it was money. And there are a lot of creators who still bash Shooter for not having the passion and the spirit of comics. And I can respect that, but at the end of the day, if you're not making money, you will have no comics. So that spirit is going to go nowhere.
Right. Yeah. And on top of that, Shooter's the same man who's is smart enough to see guys like Bill Manilow and J.M. DeMatteis and say, okay, you guys know how to fucking write. You guys know how to meet it. You can meet a deadline. I want you on, Bill, you're on Alpha Flight and Incredible Hulk. JM, you do Spider-Man.
One thing I want to mention about the issue of creator rights, I think that kind of stems from back during the magazine era, like near the era of pulp magazines. You really didn't. The writers then, I don't think, cared as much about like IP, because these weren't. No one thought, oh, the Shadow is going to be this huge, amazingly popular character. It's just a device to move the plot forward, basically. There wasn't as much attachment to characters.
Actually, wait a minute.
I don't buy it. I don't buy that simply because you have Schuster. Looking at DC.
Well, no, hold on.
I mean, we can go at the pulp level, but even
I'm talking
then, money was an issue.
Well, actually,
that pulp era wasn't too far removed from the quote unquote golden age of comics.
Actually, I was almost in agreement. I almost was, until I stepped back and I said, okay, actually, it really depended on the mentality of the person working. The guy who basically created the Shadow and basically wrote the vast majority of the Shadow's episode, short novels and whatnot, he was just a guy who loved to work. He just loved to work. And that's kind of a weird attitude that I think a lot of people just wouldn't have nowadays. It's like, wait a minute. You just love to work, and as long as you were well paid, you wouldn't have cared about the ownership. And yeah, that was kind of an odd mentality back then. That's something that kind of blows our minds. It's as much in the same way that with when Simon and Schuster sold off the rights for Superman, they didn't. I mean, they were teenagers, and in a strange sense, Superman is kind of like a very unique thing. It's like it's a kid. It's a superhero for kids, kind of made by kids, and they were kids when they were kind of selling it off. But they just didn't have, I mean, knowing the time period that this came out, they didn't really have a full grasp of what it was they were creating and how valuable it would really be. They were kind of shitposting.
Then you have Bob Kane, who made damn sure he got his made damn sure he got his stacks, his royalties from the word go.
Yeah. And the same thing
did everything he can to fuck everybody over that worked with him.
Yeah. And then you have guys like Will Eisner, especially, who basically, and in all fairness, it's probably because there's a huge age difference in that time period. Simon and Schuster are like, mid-teenagers. And then Will Eisner, he's a guy who's, hitting early adulthood. So there's a whole other mentality that was at work, which is like, when he was founding his own studio and doing The Spirit as a newspaper insert, he was also doing a whole bunch of other comics as well. He was running a shop. So he had a completely different mentality because he was older, because, wait a minute, it's the Depression. There's a whole bunch of these legal companies that have moved out, which means if I wanted to run my own shop, I can easily get this workspace and this office space, and the rent's going to be super cheap because the landlord's going to be thirsty for anybody to move in there and work. So I now have the space, and there's a demand for some of this stuff, but I can at least, now that because I have this extra space I can get some other people together, and we can sort of slowly build up a shop that produces all sorts of stuff, including works for the military. But that's what an age difference can make, right? When you're a kid, you're like, I gotta get this out now, man. I gotta get this out now. And then if you're like a young adult, you're going, wait a second, this is valuable. How can I get this to pay me? It was just a byproduct of their difference in ages, really.
Yeah, and the generation. I mean, it's harder. A lot of people have their eyes on it more now. They're going to be more cognizant of what creator rights means and what they need to go to get them and everything else. It's interesting, though. It doesn't always mean you're going to get what you want. I think, Kelly Sue and Fraction have their Milk-Fed Productions that I'm sure is going to have the next breakout Hollywood movie any day now, someday. But not every creator-owned property is the same level of work.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I was going to add to this too is, I think part of what sort of drove that is you had folks like Matt Fraction kind of growing up in the era when they see something like Ninja Turtles exploding like crazy, and they end up seeing that, unlike the other like mainstream kind of Marvel stuff, I was like, wait a minute, these guys own this stuff? And the biggest ringleader for a lot of the SJW inflection in comics is somebody that I know some people kind of like on here. I sometimes like his work, but as I've grown older, I've begun to slowly realize, yeah, he's kind of the bad guy, and you're going to have to accept that, even in the work that he produces. I'm talking about the one, the only, and possibly one of the best damn comics influencers in the 90s up to the early 2000s. Was probably none other than Warren Ellis.
Yeah. Warren Ellis, the forefather of a lot of more progressive comic, but even Ellis. I mean, I think that's an interesting point because Ellis's books sell by and large, where a lot of these others don't. So even though he has a lot of these elements that make people crazy, he puts out work that is still marketable.
Yeah,
there was some differences. I mean, the new Wildstorm imprint is not selling at all. For me, I know other comic shops say that it's flying off the shelves. I don't know where these shops are, and they can have some of my issues because I can't move it at all. But generally speaking, he's a bankable name.
Yeah, I mean, a big aspect of, but I think part of the reason why is that Warren Ellis is kind of like what's that fancy term? He's the bleep you love to hate. And what I mean by that is, in hindsight, I used to lurk the Warren Ellis forum back in its heyday. That was one of the big underground comics influencer sites that was out there. Simply because there were a lot of young villains that you see that first networked on there. And in turn, they sort of networked to a couple of other low-tier comics blogging sites.
Ooh.
But not necessarily like the big ones like CBR or whatnot, like old places that I don't even think you could probably find some remnants of nowadays. I'm not sure if they're still around, like Pop Image, for instance.
Ain't it cool?
Yeah, and
I think Ain't It Cool still exists. I haven't been there in like eons, though.
No, not Ain't It Cool. They were very much against Ain't It Cool.
Oh, they hated Ain't It Cool News?
Yes, they did.
That's a surprise, actually.
Yeah. So, basically, it was this. It was, to put it politely, it had rules in there that you would see kind of being pushed when some of these folks got to other media businesses or started going on Twitter. Like Warren Ellis, like the reason why I didn't post, I could only lurk but never post on there, is because Warren Ellis demanded that if you were going to be on his forum, you had to use your real name. Period.
Fuck you.
Yeah, he was that type of guy. But the other thing I would give Warren Ellis is that he knew how to use the early web very well in aggressively promoting his products. He knew how to get them cross-promoted with other with other pros that came on there. Like there were all sorts of comic pros folks from that time period, like guys like Dwayne McDuffie that would hang around on the Warren Ellis forum, and basically they all networked. Some of them were starting to set up new comics or whatnot, but the key thing was that Warren Ellis started the Warren Ellis forum originally just for his work as a discussion space on Delphi, so people could talk to him about it, because he figured having that direct approach would give him more contact to his customers, and thus, in turn, getting more sales. And then he would push them to his blog site, where he would put up his columns, and then eventually he would be able to push them to whatever next bit of social media site at the time to get them to constantly follow him. He was really, really amazingly good at that. The problem is, as you say, his students have not learned from the master.
Most of them were talentless hacks who blew somebody at Marvel or DC to get the job they got.
Well, that's because a lot of those folks that you're seeing there were folks who were originally on the Warren Ellis forum. One of the first things that happened when people were talking about back in the days of GG is one of the things I was saying to folks on Co is, look, if you want to know where these bad guys come from, you just go to the Warren Ellis forum, run a spider, and just download all the forum information, because it's all open. It's still there. The archive's still there. He never deleted it. And you're going to figure out where each and every one of these villainous types came from. You know, it's basically the Warren Ellis forum was the something awful of basically comics forums, and its influence is still being felt right now today.
Jesus, dude, why don't you just pull the guy's soul out while you're fucking at it?
well, it's
Warren Ellis deserves the full blunt of crap he gets. I blame him and everything he has done for why comics are shit.
Transmetropolitan.
Yeah, but here's the dirty secret. Transmetropolitan is an amazing mise-en-scène series. It really has a crappy plot. It does. Warren Ellis is not good at finishing the stories he starts. Or at least he's good at writing very short stories.
That's a common problem in comics now, ain't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know the one thing. So I'll throw out the thing that everybody will hate me for. I get tired of when I'm looking at Twitter and people are talking about some of these new creators and why are they there, and we get into SJW infiltration and diversity hires and everything else. I'm sure that's all fine, but one thing people need to realize is in the Warren Ellis forums and a lot of the people who were kind of young and coming up in their career, they learned how to network incredibly well through that system, both on board publicly and off. And one of the things that I see all the posts of like, how is Mags still getting work? Well, I'll tell you, she markets and packages herself incredibly well. You just the onboarding and granted, a lot of the friends are there and there's a lot of nepotism. That's also completely true, but it's a shame that the quality of the packaging does not go to the quality of the work, because it's that part gets ignored by and large. But the packaging of a lot of these people, Kelly Thompson is another one who knows how to market and self-promote herself incredibly well to these companies, and she is on it. And that's one thing that if comics want to evolve and new creators want to come in, they're going to have to learn some of those tricks, because being able to network and put your portfolio and put all this stuff together and position what you do in an effective, corporate-friendly way, most people do not have that. And a lot of the kind of the nicer, sad to say, John Malin is a good guy, writes, he deals with the fans, does a lot of good things, but his packaging to the publishers is very amateur compared to a Mags, and that sounds painful, and people will hate me for saying it, but it's That's part of the business part that these guys got nailed, and they've got people have to figure that out.
Like, yeah, I understand like packaging yourself well and stuff like that. And if Mags can do that, then good on her. But shouldn't it translate into the work as well? Because from what I understand, Mags comics do not sell all that well. No. And from what I've seen of Mags comics, they're just not very good. And I'm not trying. I know it's fashionable to shit on Mags Visaggio, but just looking at it from like a comic books fan, like, would I pick this up and read it? No, probably not. It doesn't make sense. It's not fun. It's all message fic. It's just like there's nothing there to make me come back and buy a second issue if I even buy a first one. No, so shouldn't that get her in trouble somewhere down the line that she's not able to keep a consistent sale rate?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, sorry, somebody else jump in here, but to answer your question, yeah.
Eventually. I got a better answer for you, Jim, and it goes. Sorry, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, man.
Jump in.
Yeah.
Am I coming through clearly enough to speak?
Ground control to Major.
Sorry, but what I was gonna say, Jim, is that I am speaking, nigga.
I think Templar's on a delay.
Yes, unfortunately. But what I was going to say was that, Jim, the reason why you're seeing what it is, where she doesn't get in trouble, is that I'm very suspecting that most comic industry types are not in it to sell. From my understanding, Marvel doesn't have a comic division at this point. I mean, maybe comics over there can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that the comic Marvel line is more geared towards selling the movies these days than actually moving product.
Oh fuck!
Well, see, hang on. No, I have to disagree with you there, man. I get what you're saying. But that would be a smart business move because the movies are insanely popular, and yet I always hear these stories coming from people like Diversity in Comics or whoever, or even like people who own comic shops on Twitter. They're always talking about, these kids come in with their parents because they went to see the Captain America movie or they went to see Iron Man and they really like Iron Man and they really like Tony Stark as a character, and then they come into the comic shop and it's not Tony Stark, it's Riri Williams.
Yeah, 100%. No. I was thinking before we joined here, how do you get new readers in? Well, the absolute brain dead easiest way to get them in right now is that you have an incredibly powerful billion-dollar movie business, and including, as much as people laugh about DC and their stumbles in the box office, when you're making $100 million movies, you are still getting a new audience. That is still, you translate that to comics and you are made. But the problem is, and it happened with Black Panther, Marvel ponied up a bunch of cash to put comic books in all the AMC theaters. So you went to see Black Panther, you got a free copy of a comic book. Unfortunately, it's the first issue of Coates' run. And if you're a kid watching that movie, which has a lot of action, a lot of special effects, Black Panther doing all this stuff, and then you open up that comic, and there's a bunch of talking and world building there. None of that translates. And you throw $3.99 on top of that, it's like that you are not getting any of that audience.
But once again, there's that weird wrinkle that we were gonna fly back to, is if I was in charge of Marvel, I'd be he's going, Coates, I don't even know why we hired you here. I know that this is only because one of our gay staffers had sex with your friend Andrew Sullivan, and I don't know how that happened, but we can't put this out to the new readership. We're gonna go with the Jack Kirby stuff. And Jack Coates is going to scream and whine about it and say, well, why? Well, because have you actually looked at the Jack Kirby Black Panther one? It's got crazy colors. It's got space gods. It even has Yakub in it. No, I'm not making this up. If you go through the 70s run of Kirby's Black Panther, they literally have Yakub before Yakub was a thing.
I think that fucking settles it. We need to get Marvel in on the Kemet thing.
Exactly.
Marvel just needs to sell it to black nationalists, and then they will have their fucking audience.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. But that boils down once again to the fact that we have all these Marvel movies But Ike Perlmutter, being the stingiest bugger on the face of the planet, isn't putting out what people need to see, which are the reprints. How are they going to, like, look, it's not hard to sound, I think one of the things that can be dispelled, I think, in the 21st century is it's not hard for somebody to get caught up on the backstory of a character. And some characters are very iconic, like Captain America, that you could just explain his initial backstory in less than a paragraph, and people say, okay, I get it. So what are the best runs? What are his best adventures that I want to see? Only to discover you can never see those adventures because Mr. Ike Perlmutter, I am so cheap that I'm a Mossad agent. I'm an ex-Mossad agent that will go and fish for paper clips to save money out of the trash. Okay, that's how much of a cheapskate that guy is known to be.
Yeah, but he's in good company. I mean,
the best story of him being a cheapskate is when they're doing a Marvel press release in like the early days, and basically Ike Perlmutter restricts all the guests to 1 soda and 1 bag of chips. No, you don't get 2. You only get 1. And that don't care if you waste that soda. You better not wolf it down, motherfucker, because that's all you're getting. And it's like, from my understanding, it got so bad with Ike Perlmutter's meddling that Feige went over his head directly to Bob Iger and basically told him, "You either get this guy off my back or I'm out."
No, it was, that's exactly a true story. I think Fergie, so studios and publishing were always somewhat separated. But when the movie business was blowing up, and not only Perlmutter, but it wasn't just him. I mean, you had Bendis and you had Axel, and you had a bunch of people who were being in there to be consultants. And what the straw that broke the camel's back was that these guys were so annoying and so frustrating and divas basically on the set. And Fergie and the way he was running the movie studio business, people they were hiring, was a complete bloodbath. You didn't have any tolerance for outside consultants, and you saw some of that with some of the directorships and other things. Even what went on with Ant-Man, they were not going to put up with any of that. So the noise got so bad. He went up to the board and said, we're splitting, and he held all the cards. All the money was coming in there. Publishing was hurting, and so it further got shuffled. And it's worse this week. There was news this week about another reorganization within Disney, and publishing is getting further crammed down while studios just got elevated and took on a bunch of new responsibility. So things are bleak.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, as I've said in the past, I really do think that at the end of the day, Marvel only cares about their movies because it's like, who cares if the comics aren't doing great? We own the film industry at this point. No one can compete with the amount of money we're making there. So why would we even bother trying to restore something that is pretty much on its way out from our perspective anyway?
Yeah, didn't the Fox deal go through recently?
Dude, I don't know if it's cleared regulatory hurdles yet, but I'm just going to say that if you want to see what an apocalypse level event for a mindset like this will look like, hearing the news that the Justice Department is stepping in and is not letting the deal go forward is going to be what that looks like.
Yeah, it will. It is. It's got to clear regulations, but the current administration.
I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah. No,
that's all I'm gonna note.
It's not going to happen unless Trump shows up into the office, stares Ike Perlmutter and his Mossad eyes straight down the line, and says, "So, are you going to get rid of the pause?"
I'll put my money on it. We'll go through, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. And then Ike Perlmutter, the ex-Mossad agent, all of a sudden goes weak at the knees, and it's like, my ex-Mossad super spy instincts are not working. Why? Why is this man with this orange hair freaking me out?
I mean, that's the thing though with what Templar was talking about with the movies, like concentrating on the movies rather than the comic books. It's like, well, okay, you have this like obscenely successful line of movies, right? And they're going to continue being successful because you have an audience there that's just going to go see it because it's Marvel. But people are starting to get worn out on the superhero shit. Like,
well,
they're starting to get a little bit of market fatigue there. Well, so if you don't have the comics there to back up the movies and continue that wave going on, not to mention like the insane cultural relevance and trend-setting power of comic books, because none of Marvel's movie success would exist without, fucking 80 years of comics backing them up. Yeah. So if you ignore the thing that got you where you are, then you're never going to be able to make that thing successful in another medium for a sustainable period of time. Yeah, they've got it for 15 years so far. But, eventually people are going to cool on the superhero movies, and they're going to want to see Westerns or spy thrillers or samurai movies or something else, so you got to have those people coming back to your comics. Yeah, go ahead, man. Sorry.
Okay, it's all right. But what I want to say is, you're assuming that's the mindset Disney and folk are actually approaching this from. And I'm going to tell you right now, they don't give a shit about any of that. They care about what is our profit projections for the next 5 to 10 years going to look like. That this is the mindset every major corporation in North America adopts, man. They only care about the 5 or the 10-year business plan. And I find it interesting that 5 or 10 years is where they go out projecting all of their business shit to, because it's due to an observation that Fab over there once made, that most corporations seem to be staffed by dyed-in-the-wool red socialists. And it's like they just have an obsession with 5 and 10-year plans.
That's another thing that I think is an actual issue here, is that in the Soviet Union and stuff like that, because we can't deny that most of these people that are in the comic book industry right now, like a lot of the creators, are socialists. So when you look at stuff like the USSR or Mao's China or stuff like that, they had government sanctioned art, and stuff that wasn't sanctioned by the government was actively quashed, and everything that was sanctioned by the government was basically kept up by government grants. So the creators who were doing the government stuff, as long as they stayed within the lines, they were allowed to do basically whatever they want. So these guys kind of have this mentality that they should be allowed to do whatever they want. And if the audience isn't going to pick up the slack and pay them for it, then the government is going to have to. And that's just not how it works in America. That's not how this kind of capitalistic business economy works.
Well, here's sort of the problem, though. The whole fucking system gets fucked when you're essentially a monopoly, or if you're like a business who's essentially parasiting off another end of the business. I mean, YouTube doesn't make Google money. It's a fucking drain on them. But you know why they keep it around? Because they can support it with their ad business, and they get to push out anyone attempting to get in on this market until they can figure out a way to make it profitable.
And also social capital. That's a huge thing that if you're smart, you can pay off massive dividends in the long run. That is if you're smart. If you're an utterly short-term socialist clod who's used to 5 to 10 years plans, usually what happens by year 2 or 3, everything implodes.
So the Eric Schmidt model.
Yes, the Eric Schmidt model. Basically, for those who don't know, and who might be listening to this stream, Eric Schmidt is the former executive of Google, formerly the CEO, who basically weaseled his way in. Oh, and one other thing we should also add. Eric Schmidt's father used to work under the Treasury under Richard Nixon. He is as deep state a businessman as you could possibly get. And prior to him, one of the big things that he was hedging bets on was he was hoping, with a lot of the policies he had implemented in Google, pushing for the diversity hires to get tax credits in California, pushing for more left-wing stuff that would appease the more socialist branch of the Democratic Party, doing everything they could to change algorithms to make the Democrats look good, even putting out 3 to $4 million sort of projects and working with groups like MoveOn.org, his end goal was to see how in deep he could get with the connections with the Clintons in order to transform Google from a private company that sort of made products that compete on the private market to make cash, but to fully transform it into, say, a major telecommunications company that basically makes money off of enterprise business, which is fancy term for business-to-business contracts, but more often than not, enterprise is just a fancy term for saying, ooh, baby, we now have nothing but government grants running our company, and it's great. Yeah. We don't even have to put out a product anymore. We just get the money and collect it, and we can just stretch this out forever.
To bring this back to... Sorry, go ahead.
Like that's the thing though, is that like we've seen the government intervene in business before in America. Like it happened in, I want to say somewhere around 2008 with the housing crash and like the banking bubble, I think is what it's called. But the governments were bailing out companies that were too big to fail. I remember hearing that going around a lot. But nobody in the government is going to look at Marvel. the fucking comic books.
There is
say
one
that Marvel is too big to fail. We have to save Marvel. Like I don't see that fucking happening.
No. But Marvel, I mean, it goes back to Disney. Like Disney, the studio's business makes sense.
Hold on.
Go, Templar.
Sorry, I'm on a delay. What I was gonna say was that, Jim, you're thinking of how this would go down all wrong, because what Marvel would really like, and this goes for pretty much every major media empire out there, is they would like it for it to go back to sort of like the World War II days, where they're under contract by the government to put out educational and propaganda pieces and shit like that, where not only are they getting money from the government, but now as part of their patriotic duty, the citizenry is paying for this work. So ask yourself, Jim, in the current year +3, where misogynies and rapists and sexism and all this other ism is out there that needs to be fought with the media, where do you think Marvel is going to sell itself to the government under this environment?
I mean, you make a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. I just don't think that anybody at Marvel has the sense to go and actually try to make that happen.
There is one comic I've heard is in some schools. Have you guys heard of Mouse?
I have heard of Mouse.
Yeah, the one that's the Holocaust memoir, Art Spiegelman's father.
Yes.
Sells very well.
Yes, that one is in a few school systems from what I've heard. Yeah. So if they could get a few more books like that in the school system, then hey, guess who's paying for it?
Actually, there is one wrinkle I was going to bring up with regards to comics and new readers. Do we all remember the Scholastic schoolbook forms?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And in fact, it's very interesting that you brought that up, because a good example of that is Scholastic Publishing has actually published a whole bunch of kids' graphic novels, especially I'm forgetting the guy's name. The guy who created Earthward Jim.
Doug TenNapel.
That would be
Doug TenNapel. That's the name. Yeah, Doug TenNapel, I think, has made a pretty good career of not only getting his stuff into bookstores, but also getting a lot of his kids' books sold through Scholastic and through their various stores. The thing, though, is
hang on, I've got some Doug TenNapel over here. Give me a second. I think some of it actually is published by Scholastic.
Yeah, he's got a contract there.
Dave, yeah. I think there's another big one you're forgetting. Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, who didn't buy the Scholastic versions of Calvin and Hobbes from those catalogs?
Yeah.
And I'm going to put it this way. between attempts to get Common Core in every major school system in the West to any future attempt by various empires to try to get their stuff into the school system, I'm going to put it this way. If you're a publisher, your number one objective is to somehow get a piece of that textbook publishing pie because, oh dear God, is it a racket.
Yeah, one thing critics of Common Core don't really talk about is the literature side. Thanks to Common Core, basically any book can be part of the school curriculum now. That's kind of why you're seeing the shenanigans with the Hugo Award these days. Like they all want to get in on that.
Yeah, I mean, Scholastic is becoming a good distribution channel for the publishers. It's how, I mean, Moon Girl does incredibly well for Marvel there. It's how a lot of these titles are coming in.
It's always the case of, why would I bother catering to comic books, comic fans, shops, and all their fickle tastes when there's an easy government contract just laying on the table waiting for the grabbing? If you're a businessman, you would be stupid not to take that.
In before Templar's scheme for fixing America is making a whole bunch of hyper-nationalist American comic book adventures sold through Scholastic, and it takes off like a rocket. He gets in there.
Scholastic.
Oh, yeah. That would be funny as shit. Start working on that, Templar. That would be amazing.
It'll be video games, and it will be the portrayal of the hyper-nationalistic ventures of Trump's anointed superheroes.
You're gonna get him to start selling Hearts of Iron.
Yes.
Oh boy, yes, Hearts of Iron for educational.
Dude, there's already. You realize that fucking Darkest Hour was used by the fucking Marine War College for an exercise, right?
Are you serious?
So there's Yes, I linked Rain a PDF of this where they went over the after action report, and it demonstrated to me that yeah, the Marines are fucked because they don't understand how to execute a naval landing anymore. They got like 29 divisions wiped out trying to land in Italy. It was fucking embarrassing to read, man.
Oh, God.
And wait, let's not forget Battlezone. You're forgetting like Atari's adaptation of Battlezone for the military. Like, that's one of the oldest examples of that out there from the 80s.
What is this? Some fucking Last Starfighter Ender's Game bullshit?
Dude, you'd be surprised at how common it really is. You think at first, we can't be making this up, and then we show you.
Jim?
Yep.
I'm going to let you in on a secret. The controllers for fucking Apache helicopters are basically shells of PS2 controllers.
He's not wrong.
I'm not joking.
Oh my God.
Okay, that they are really doubling down on this type of shit for training purposes. And
that is
if you
fucking
don't think
hilarious.
this is, and here's something more, if you really want to start screaming in agony at the nightmare you're going to be subjected to as a youngster, go look up the Stanford Persuasive Labs. There's some scary shit with VR they're up to that folks really need to be paying attention to.
Have you ever seen A Clockwork Orange?
I mean, VR chat is scary enough, but what about Clockwork?
They're trying to perfect the technique of brainwashing, bro. That they're working on it. They've taken it as an instruction manual.
Yeah, the Ludovico technique, if I'm not mistaken.
Hold on, Comic Perch, you got something to say?
Oh no, just I've got to close up shop in a few minutes. So I was just telling everybody I'm gonna have to bail out here soon. But
okay.
But no,
Sorry for stealing all the thunder, bro. I'm just putting out all this here because so much of this actually does tie into comics because they're going to be an arm in this type of shit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so as a theory, I'll leave you guys with this. I think that a lot of retailers, we believe, is coming, and not in the next year, but next 2 years or so. I think somebody said it earlier, the movie division is going to have their first, not necessarily flop, but film that misses expectations. Even though everybody's all hyped for the Avengers, I wouldn't be completely surprised because the benchmarks for what that movie's supposed to make is incredibly high. And it's going to be hard to make it. If China doesn't come on board with that film, it won't make it. So
they split into 2 movies. That's going to, I don't think that's going to go well for them.
No, and it's the first movie's likely to end on a downer. And so, but anyway, the theory is that right now at Disney, who is the real company we're talking about, the Marvel Studios is Marvel as far as Disney is concerned. The publishing division is just a faint offshoot, an IP farm that right now is not even giving off IP. And the most likely scenario, and you can see it with Disney, what they've done in the past, is that if there's any stutter in the movie business, if there's any kind of weakness that shows there, things trend down, they're going to shift all their attention to the movie business, integrating it into parks and into the other lines, and they're going to very quickly move to licensing their products. So Marvel as a publishing division will largely go away, and it will be the Marvel license. And you will see companies like Dark Horse or IDW or others bidding on that license. And the whole empire that's been built there in New York will slowly cease to exist as it becomes just licensed properties. And that's my prediction. I think that we can look forward to that out of Marvel in the next 5 to 10 years.
It's already reality. I mean, look at the IDW happening. Star Wars books.
Yep. I mean, I'm not going to say that it wouldn't be funny as shit to see Spider-Man by Mike Mignola.
Actually, I'd like to see that, or a fucking Garth Ennis Spidey book just for shits and giggles. But comics,
that would just be Garth Ennis would be going back to it.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is you will do the math. Disney will do the math at some point and realize licensing this stuff out will make them actually more money than this division. And
probably.
Yeah.
So
hey, the thing is, oh, go on.
I was just going to ask, about a few more, about just like if you don't mind just talking a little bit more shit about Diamond, simply because I cannot be the only one who hates these fuckers.
No, Diamond's the worst. Look, that's the other.
Diamond's the only fucking game in town. That's the problem.
It is. They do have. I mean, this is a rumor. I haven't seen the contract. Obviously, nobody has. But there's a belief, at least in the industry, that in the next 2 to 3 years, some of those exclusives and some of the territories and things they've done start to go away. Now, the question is anybody going to step up and want to be a comic distributor in 2020? Probably not. But yeah, everybody wants them to die. Nobody likes them. They. I
mean, they're part of the reason why shit's going south. Because it's been a while since I've been in the fucking comic book biz. But last time I remember is in order to get certain books, you had to buy a shit ton of others.
Yeah, there's no service to the groups. It is, and you go to Comic Pro, and I didn't go this year, but a different retailer is going this year, and the comments that you hear from Diamond is that they view the comic shops that they supply to as Blockbuster, and they talk about them that way of, well, we're just waiting for you guys to all die, and that's what they're supplying to. So if they have such disdain to their own customer base, I mean, yeah, they are absolutely the worst.
Perch, are you following David Lilly? He's the guy who does Dreamkeepers. I'm not. You're
the second person to say that actually recently.
Yeah. In the early days of Comicsgate, the hashtag, I guess, they were banging on the drum of this other publishing, this other distributor that they do things a bit differently, where you got to go. They don't have a lot of the crazy crap that Diamond does. I don't remember the name of it though.
There's been other attempts. I think Altera is doing some direct things. I mean, there's other ways to get it done. It's just the market's not healthy enough at the moment.
If I were to hazard a guess, I would almost expect that Amazon becomes the storefront for all comics in the future going forward. I mean, they own the infrastructure to ship out anywhere.
I 100% agree. That was why we all believe that's why they ultimately bought Comixology. They're going to transcend the digital print. We're looking at an Amazon world in the future. Absolutely.
Rip in peace, comics.
After all, Jeff Bezos got to own all the infrastructure because it don't matter who wins when I own the bullets, the bandages, and all the things they will require.
I mean, shit. If they do it better than Diamond, though, like if they're more equitable to their comic shops and stuff like that, then I wouldn't personally mind seeing Diamond go away and Amazon supplanting them. But yeah, I'm not the only one who's concerned about Amazon having as big of a level of control as they do over so many fucking things.
I'd air caution to that, but I'll say one thing that Amazon has access to that some companies like HP have experimented with. They'll have access to print on demand.
Yeah.
Which, if you really think about it, we've had that technology for close to several decades now. Yeah. Print on demand changes the game immensely in that, well, we print what's on demand. We're not sitting around in a massive warehouse trying to get something. If something needs to be ordered from the back catalog, we can print it like that.
Yep. Yeah, I think print on demand is another part of this business in the future. I mean, look, I think I have lots of suspicions about Amazon. Obviously, I live in their shadow, but we would happily take anyone to beat Diamond at this point. I mean, it really is anyone. If the Clintons want to form a publishing company, bring it on. Just anybody. Anyone. We'll take it, anything.
Better watch out, Perch. You're eventually going to be suicided with 5 shotgun shells to the back of the head for that.
Actually, no. I'm inclined to agree at this point because Diamond really is that fucking terrible.
They are. They are the worst.
I mean,
so Bill,
working in a fucking comic book shop basically killed my fucking enjoyment of the whole fucking medium.
Yeah.
So Bill, do you think Diamond is engaging in higher forms of spirit cooking?
Probably. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they might be the devil incarnate for all I know.
It feels that way sometimes.
Satan's grand master plan to take over America was Diamond Comics distribution.
All the signs are there. No, it's well, listen, I've got to leave. It's been wonderful talking to you guys, and next time I'll stay longer, but take it easy. And
cool. You want to do this again sometime?
Goodbye, my friend.
We should do this again next Friday.
All right. Nighty.
Okay, should I end the stream here, or do we want to keep going?
Oh, let's keep talking shit.
I did have something that I wanted to bring up because this whole stream is about how to get comics in the hands of new readers, and I think that there's 2 ways that comic companies specifically can do it. And I kind of get this idea just from watching what happened with the pulps and like reviewing that history, as well as looking at what Alterna Comics is doing right now. And what Alterna Comics is doing specifically is they're going back to newsprint. So their comics are ridiculously cheap to manufacture. You can get like 2 to 3 Alterna Comics for the price of 1 Marvel comic and get just about as much bang for your buck. They're also doing direct distribution with comic book stores because Diamond wouldn't ship them for a long time. I think they recently got a deal with Diamond to ship them out to comic book shops. But the other thing, apart from just making the production process on the comics themselves cheaper, is you have to, get your shit into grocery stores. That, I think, would do a lot towards saving this industry because I go shopping for groceries at like Walmart and local chains like IGA and Food Lion and stuff like that, and our regional chains. And I see all kinds of just absolute bullshit in the magazine racks right there. And if you could convince chains like IGA or Food Lion or even Walmart to just put some comics in the like right at head level for the kids, like right about 10 years old, you find the average height of it, just one comic book or 2 comic books, just like 1 row of stuff that would appeal to kids, and then you write those stories for those kids, which is kind of my next point, is that you have to, like, boys build the market. That's what happened with the pulps. The vast majority of pulp stories back in the day, whether they knew it or not, they were marketed and written towards boys' interest. And I'm not talking about like college age males. I'm talking about young boys who want to read stories about adventure and excitement and spies and fighter pilots.
They want to read Captain America beat the shit out of Hitler. That's what they want to see. They don't want him preaching about the ideology. See, they just want a fucking story of Captain beating the shit out of them.
And if you market those comics towards those boys, then eventually the girls will come along after, because the boys will have this cool thing that's going on and the girls will see it happening and they'll be like, well, maybe I should get involved in that. That looks cool. I mean, this is the market that happened everywhere. This is how it happened with D&D. This is how it happened with comics. This is how it happened with like every big cultural force out there that's a huge part of American identity. Is it started out with boys doing it and just enjoying it because they thought it was fun, and then it blew up into a cultural force, and then a lot of girls got involved.
Oh yeah, and in fact, I would do one step better. We do have a model that they can imitate. Which is the Archie Comics model, which is actually something that Disney Adventures was well praised for back in the day, which is that they did a lot of the sort of comic stuff and they put them out as digests, which is something that, weirdly enough, Marvel used to do at supermarkets back during the 70s. And probably maybe up until the early 80s. And then the post-Jim Shooter era, they decided not to do that. And then they sort of briefly experimented with it in the aughts, and then they stopped doing it again. It's like this terrible habit where they get something that works, and then because the management is schizophrenic, they won't stick to it so that it pays off these sweet dividends down the line.
Yeah,
ironically,
yeah.
One of the things I'm going to say here about the Archie thing, and I know you're about to say it, but let me say something here. The problem with Archie right now is they abandoned that model.
Here's what, dude. I worked at the company that actually printed the fucking books. Archie actually still owes Publishers Printing in fucking Lebanon Junction millions of dollars.
Ooh.
So yeah, the Archie books were not selling. That's so bringing them up as an example of doing anything right.
Well,
you can't really say that when you owe the people that's printing your book millions.
But what I am saying is that the form factor and the model did work for a certain period of time.
Hold on, let me give you a better example.
Yeah.
The really big titles by Viz Media, Naruto, Bleach, I think One Piece, but I don't know for sure. They sold those at Walmart. I know that Marvel tried that a little with a couple of their books, but then they kind of dropped it for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Because idiots.
And also because because once again, I think it's because Marvel, unlike DC, is just we can't put out the backlog. What if people see the backlog and like it? Well, if they see the backlog and they like it, they might get hooked on the later stuff. That might be to your best interest to keep that backlog out there.
I have another observation, and that is, how many folks you think got into comics because they got their dad's old comic books? I mean, that's something that I have to ask is, how many folks that read comics in the old days basically aren't sharing their comics with their kids anymore because they've gone to such pot like this?
Yeah, that's what I really like about Captain Frugal's channel, is that every now and again he will do a video that's like One from the Vault or something like that, or Comics from the Vault, where he'll take a comic from like the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby era and just do a review of it and take screen caps and show the art and the story and all of that stuff. And it's so much better than the stuff that we're getting today. Like go look at any contemporary review of a comic book that Diversity in Comics has done, and then go watch one of Captain Frugal's One from the Vault series, or whatever the name of the series is. It should be easy to find on his channel. The quality of the stories and even the art, like back in the 1950s, you know, people like to shit on the art because we've all gotten into this like 90s hyper realistic. Everything's got to be all like muscular, like everybody's wearing body paint and shit like that.
All the bandoleros with all the ammo pouches.
Tactical.
muscles and guns, muscles and guns.
But the quality of the stories is so much better, and it's really easy, simple to understand shit. You know what I mean? It's like Star Wars. Like a fucking 10-year-old can watch A New Hope and get what's happening in the movie, even if they don't understand the nuances, the deep, intricate, philosophy behind the movie or anything like that. They just know what's happening and it's cool to them and they fucking like it. And it was the exact same way with these comics back in the day. And that was why they did so well and appealed to so many people. And we're selling, millions of copies every month.
Right. And, shit.
That was kind of the same thing when the X-Men first came out, right? Or the old Transformers comics when they first came out, or the early G.I. Joe stuff when it came out.
I mean, shit. That's how actually I got into fucking comics. My old man actually, one of my fucking bedtime stories as a kid was Kraven's Last Hunt.
That's a pretty base dad, man. That really is.
Funeral for a Friend and Death of Superman were also in that fucking regiment.
He didn't read your Killing Joke, did he?
No, my dad actually didn't have that. He was a Spidey fan. He was more into Spidey and Superman. He didn't ever. I don't think he actually ever read Killing Joke.
That's another problem that I think is going on, is that like Alan Moore came out and he started doing all of this shit like Watchmen and V for Vendetta and stuff like that had like really well done political messages. Like V for Vendetta is kind of like a 1984 style story, only they actually do fight back and have victories and shit like that.
Actually, I was going to say that as I've gotten older and I've looked back at some of Alan Moore's work, the dirty secret that I sort of realized after I was finished reading the first, I went through the first couple of volumes of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, is that Alan Moore is like many a deconstructionist. At their heart, they're romantics, but they're endlessly obsessed about the fact that certain stories didn't give them the super satisfying wrap-up conclusion that, their English schooling taught them that they should expect in every single story. So when you're dealing with like a lot of pulp fiction and type sort of things, you may get resolutions, but you may not get the perfect resolution. Because if you go through a lot of... Because I look at a man who kind of sort of came underneath the wing of Alan Moore, guys like Warren Ellis and Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison, I think, is the only guy out of that particular British invasion that came out of 2000 AD that understood the nature of what sort of stories he's telling. Like, he does have his left-wing politics in his work, but it never comes off as obnoxious because even Grant Morrison admits that, with the way his morality kind of works, no, there has to be some way to give the audience a good resolution to what I'm doing, but I'm not going to be outright nihilistic. That's going to hit people really hard if I do that. And the thing is, Alan Moore is a kid who grew up really, really, really loving Fantastic Four and got very disappointed that it never seemed like the Fantastic Four's crazy inventions and crazy world, when you hit the 70s and 80s, didn't seem to amount to jack shit. It's like if Alan Moore had grown up reading something like Dragon Ball, where you see a character go through a particular progression and then get married or something like that, but still keep this constant sense of adventure in this crazy, fantastical world, Alan Moore probably wouldn't have turned into the hot mess that he is today. Because basically all Watchmen is him going, well, what happens after I finally finished that last issue of The Question? What happens?
I agree. I agree with you. Hang on, before we get into Watchmen, because I want to hear you go off on that. But I agree with you about
plenty of thoughts.
I got
yeah.
Oh no, I got.
I agree with you about Alan Moore. But the thing is that Alan Moore does what he does well. He's able, his run on Wildcats is fucking awesome. The part of that story that he told, it had politics in it, yes, but nothing overshadowed the story. And that's the problem with all of these people who were trying to ape Alan Moore, is that they don't understand how to do it well. They don't understand how to write an entertaining story with politics. They just understand how to do politics. So they don't have the backing of the story.
But even then, basically the Alan Moore take
I think I pissed him off, guys.
Yeah.
No, I think he's got a piss, but go on, Fab, and then I'll go because I got plenty of things to say about Alan Moore.
So the thing with I was going to say that the run that Alan Moore did on Wildcats, basically Alan Moore was asking a question. It's like, well, you got this premise, but what if they actually were done with the war back on the home planet? Because they've never kind of been there. And that's kind of where his line of reasoning is thinking. It's just that when reading some of his interviews about the Silver Age stuff and Bronze Age stuff that he read, he really liked it. He just got frustrated endlessly that it didn't seem like there were interesting consequences coming out of it. Now, the consequences he draws from it are kind of semi-nihilistic and dreary, but then I also remember, oh, wait a minute. This is Alan Moore, a guy who grew up seeing the English Empire sink into the sea like frickin' Atlantis. So, yeah, I can see where that tone and that attitude kind of comes from. By contrast, if you want to see good examples of a guy who gets the Silver Age nuttiness, but puts out compelling and interesting sort of endings that don't go down this crazy nihilistic path, you could look at Grant Morrison. Heck, you could look at the work that was done on the DCAU with Dwayne McDuffie and Paul Dini and that team of folks. Or, even better, you could look at Brave and the Bold, which I think was probably one of the second best animated universes DCU ever put out. Simply because they said, hey, the issue is not that the 60s Batman was quote-unquote corny. It's just that the 60s Batman never allowed the consequences to play out. And some of those consequences could be totally awesome and good, So the Batman, like Brave and the Bold, actually did some classic Silver Age stories, even letting us get to know the Doom Patrol and then see them go out on their last adventure. Even the episode where we first get where Jaime Reyes learns about his predecessor, who was the Blue Beetle, for instance, had that sort of tone to it. It was all about these consequences. And Batman tells him, hey, look, man, here, part of this business is you may have to bite it someday in order to do your job. But it never came off as nihilistic. There was always that air of hope. It says, hey, that's the risk. That's what we deal with on our day-to-day job. And that's why we kind of do it, because sometimes you may have to make the sacrifice to make things work. But it's just that Alan Moore, I think, being in the sort of, decayed working class British environment that had imploded beneath his feet in the 70s, he was kind of left with that type of mentality that the only consequences you can ever have in the face of disaster is nothing but doom, really, and cynicism.
I'll be honest, I can't hate Alan Moore as much as everyone else, just because it's not his fault as much that the entire comic industry decided to choose him as the model to emulate.
Yeah, I mean, they could have gone after Todd McFarlane, somebody who actually tells entertaining dark stories.
The problem at the end of the day, though, is that I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Alan Moore was aping all his shit from better writers to begin with.
Howard Chaykin being a good example of this.
Oh, not just Howard Chaykin. You're forgetting the number one place where Alan Moore came from, where he tutored.
That's what I'm going to get at, but...
2000 AD.
Not even that. I mean, for Watchmen, I could tell you straight up what his influences were. It was Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, because again, we have that whole theme of what happens when the heroes are
I think you got the timeline. You got the timeline wrong, buddy.
Yeah, that's because Watchmen actually came out pretty much simultaneously, if not like prior to Dark Knight.
Oh, right.
Now the problem with Watchmen is, here's the thing with Watchmen. It's an overrated. It's overrated because there are no characters in this story. You have caricatures of of the Question, and all that shit. But at the end of the day, there's none of these characters grow or develop over the course of the story. Everyone is exactly the same person they are at the end of the story as they were at the beginning. And while the story itself, the plot itself is okay, once again, character development isn't exactly existent in this. And then there is the, I want to say pretentiousness of it.
And that's a shame because the other series you can always compare Watchmen to is Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing, which I've now realized is freaky night and day. It's like, holy crap.
Oh, dude, his run on Swamp Thing was uncut fucking black tar horror at its finest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, to sort of ignore that one flaw, because you're right, I did mix up the timeline there. But one book that I do remember, because Bill, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, but before he wrote Watchmen, didn't Alan Moore write a couple issues of American Flag?
Yes, he did work. That's why I name dropped Howard Chaykin.
And that's kind of what I was getting at, because a lot of the shit that Watchmen tried to do with its political satire was done a lot better with American Flag.
Exactly. And to Alan Moore's credit, at least his commentary in Watchmen was subtle, more nuanced. There was an actual point to it. Now you have Jeff Johns. I have no idea what the fuck he's doing. I don't know if he's taking the piss out of Alan Moore, or if he is literally trying to do a quote-unquote successful follow-up to Watchmen. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, the reason why I bring up The Dark Knight Returns is because although maybe Alan Moore didn't ape it, I have a sneaking suspicion that he had some clue of what Frank Miller was trying to do with it before it got published. Because the way those two deal with very similar themes is... it's eerie, okay? I can't feel like there wasn't something.
People who are in the same industry do get around and talk and collaborate with one another behind the scenes. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Alan Moore and Frank Miller were, talking behind the scenes and sharing story ideas or giving critique to one another or something like that. That wouldn't shock me in the least.
But yeah, I mean, the big problem at the end of the day, at least from my perspective, was everyone thought that Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen was everything comics should be. It should be dark, brooding,
that's the problem.
Nihilistic, and how it's all hopeless, but we're going to keep fighting anyway. And I was just like...
And then Marvel adopted that. And their entire history is the exact polar opposite of everything that you just laid out.
Yes,
and here's the thing about that,
I have a point.
Go ahead.
The history of DC doesn't even support that whole thing when you really break it down. And that's something that I've never understood, why everyone simultaneously decided this is what we should be, until I fucking realized, oh wait, it's because we're dealing with poser syndrome. And it's like dark and edgy is how it's got to be done because I'm the mature adult here.
It's a great brainwashing process.
The subversion. Okay, hold on. Let me look something up real quick, because if I'm not
Yuri Bezmenov.
No.
Oh god, that talk is so depressing. Listening to him talk about that shit is so fucking depressing, man. That Yuri Bezmenov video is just like Jesus Christ.
So here's a question: what year did Watchmen come out again?
86, if I'm not mistaken.
86. Okay, let me just.
Hang on, I have the book here. Let me see.
Excuse me.
Okay, so
84. No, wait, hang on. That's a Elvis Costello song. My bad. Yeah, 86, 87.
Yeah, so literally a year after Watchmen comes out, Craven's Last Hunt comes out from Spidey, and yes, that was probably the darkest Spider-Man story ever put to page. But the difference is it wasn't blatantly nihilistic. Oh, sure, there are moments of hopelessness, it seems, or desperation when you see Peter literally crawl his way out of the fucking grave. But still, even at the end of the day, Peter didn't succumb to like the quote unquote darkness and start tearing people limb from limb because of it. He moved on.
Yeah, but the problem is that's one story out of several that just over the years went down that road, especially in the fucking 90s. Oh, dear God.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just nuke the 90s from the fucking archives? Because there's nothing of value to be preserved there.
Put the Ken Penders run of Sonic the Hedgehog in first.
Kill you!
See,
okay.
I disagree with you. Not Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs for Hire was fucking awesome. If we're gonna preserve one thing from the 90s and the late 80s, it's got to be Dinosaurs for
hold
Hire.
on. I'm gonna also say I would include a lot of the stuff that came out of First Comics is pretty damn worth preserving. Grimjack, some of the independent stuff that got put out by Kitchen Sink, such as the Xenozoic Tales / Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, that's worth preserving. There's a lot of good stuff that spread between that time period in the independents from the 70s, 80s, and right up to the 90s. Heck, the 70s, you got to preserve a lot of the Warren magazines. Those Warren magazines are a lot of fun to frickin' read. And I would also include Marvel's Epic line, too, because there's a lot of shit that sort of comes back into print every once in a while, but...
Well, there was Jim Starlin on the Epic line, so you can't really talk too much shit.
Yeah,
I'm seeing JD in the chat, and I want to get him in here because he's like a fucking manga and anime expert.
but I'm gonna say to you is that yes, the 90s is one of those weird things where the biggest, loudest, Nickelodeonist thing, makes you think that was the only thing that was there, but. For me, I sort of got into comics collecting in the 90s because of shows up here in our neck of the woods like Prisoners of Gravity, for instance. And,
that was the one that was put out of that guy's house. Like, he just did it independently on public access, didn't he?
Well, no. Not public. Well, it was on the original station is TVO. TVO is still a thing. It's the provincial educational channel, but it's not a guy. They didn't just put it out of the house. They actually used a studio and all that. And it started off with like a few episodes. It was low budget. And the second season, they got more of a budget because the ratings went up through the roof. And was it the guy who basically hosts the show? The main guy who decided to start it up was it's a Canadian comedian from an improv group known as the Frantics, Rick Green.
Those guys? That dude?
Wait, you mean the Rick Green show, dude?
No, that's Rick Green.
Boot to the head? That Frantics?
Yes. The Frantics.
Oh.
4 on the floor?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my gosh. A guy all the way that south of the States actually remembers 4 on the floor and the Frantics. Oh my God! Sometimes I wonder how far sub-Canadian stuff actually travels down to your neck of the woods. I know Grassy is a big thing down there.
Here's the thing: we actually had Dr. Demento on the airwaves back in the day. The reason I know about the Frantics is because my mom and my dad were familiar with the Boot to the Head skits.
Yeah.
I mean, the only reason I know about Prisoners of Gravity is because I actually went and found the archives on YouTube of Harlan Ellison is Watching.
Oh, yes.
And there's one episode where he talks about Prisoners of Gravity. And then I went out and tried to find Prisoners of Gravity, and it is fucking impossible to find that show anywhere. It's just, it does not exist anymore.
Well, it exists, but they've had issues trying to clear the rights to put the back catalog back up.
That shit needs to get fucking cleaned up, because I want to watch Prisoners of Gravity, man. That's like that. Like I don't even want to watch the backlogs of Mystery Science Theater 3000 as badly as I want to watch Prisoners of Gravity.
Wasn't that the one where dude was homeboy was allegedly on a satellite or some shit?
Well, basically, they came up with a goofy premise, and they said, okay, just for a joke, it's like, well, the whole plot is basically Rick Green playing himself. Basically, it's this big, huge 80s, comic book nerd and stuff. He DeLoreans, he drives a taxi. So he DeLoreans a taxi with like a bunch of rockets out in the middle of good old school T-Dot, aka Toronto, in the 80s, prior to the place being turned into an amalgam paused mess. And then in order to escape the pause, he flies up on a ramp and has to launch himself into space. He had no real plan. He was just going to Elon Musk the whole ride. And then all of a sudden, he hits this massive futuristic communications satellite sitting in space.
Yeah, okay. I've actually seen clips of this.
Yeah. So
this sounds awesome.
It is awesome.
It does.
It really is. If you watching Prison, the best part is when I got to watch Prisoners of Gravity, the educational station that it was on in my Canuckistan neck of the woods, we got to watch that after Doctor Who. Oh yes, old school Doctor Who, folks. Old
Doctor Who, the good shit.
Yes, you do not understand. This was like that show is what made me the nerd I am today. That's the show that made me learn about Gunbuster, okay? Before I finally saw it a few years later at the local anime club at one of our universities. And I was like going, oh my God, I'm actually seeing the thing that I could only dream of hearing back in was it 88 thereabouts. So I'm like going, holy shit, it's real. Oh my God, it's real, Morty. Gunbuster's real.
It's real.
Gynax is real, Morty. It's real.
They weren't fucking around, Morty. It's a thing, Morty.
I see we're dealing with some high IQ individuals.
Yeah, and so I would love it. I would love it if they cleared all the freaking rights and just put out a nice little DVD box set explaining how they made the show.
Oh man, fuck that! Like, Sci-Fi Channel should just rerun it.
Why would you put it on that fucking pause network?
Because that could save the fucking Sci-Fi Channel.
Dude, it's never going to happen.
Put out
Jim,
how the internet ruined my life.
Oh God,
Jim, the Expanse couldn't even save Sci-Fi.
I have not kept up with Sci-Fi in years. So my last memories of watching the Sci-Fi Channel are back when they used to have like droids and Ewoks and what was that?
Planet of the Apes,
Tripping the Rift and shit like that.
They're currently running a very expensive advertisement for James S.A. Corey's Expanse series of space opera novels.
Oh boy!
The only thing
I don't know how.
The only thing I remember of the Sci-Fi Channel was Boa versus Anaconda.
Oh, dude, you missed out. You really fucking missed out.
Yeah,
the Sci-Fi Channel.
So I've been told.
Well, actually, I'll say one thing. The Sci-Fi Channel was where I first got to see a couple of episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000. A couple of classic ones, actually. I was visiting some cousins of ours in the Maryland era. Sorry, not era. Area. Era. If I'm saying era, it's like I have a time machine and I decide to go back there in the 1600s.
No. What it is What it is that you got to apologize for Fab. It's his Canadian speech impediment, guys. He can't say about correctly either.
A boot.
We forgive you, man. We forgive you.
All right, but still, I mean, shit. I think it's safe to say things went downhill for Sci-Fi shortly after USA bought them.
Actually,
no. Things really start going to shit when they abuse the fuck out of the Babylon 5 license.
Actually, I'm going to do you one step better. Sci-Fi went down because if they were smart, they would have hired Joe Bob Briggs to run the channel. And then everything would have been all right. But unfortunately, they did the same thing that mysteriously seems to happen every single time you have something that's really successful, makes a ton of money. Hey, I'm George Lucas. To show everyone that I'm the greatest, most progressive man in the world, I'm giving it to Kathleen Kennedy. Well, what did she do? Well, she looked out and she managed Steven Spielberg. How bad could she be? I mean, now Star Wars is all run by a woman. See how progressive a boomer I am. I'm a very progressive boomer. Please don't hate Mr. George Lucas and his 3 sequels.
No, flawed intellect in the chat is right. Sci-Fi stopped being good because they stopped airing Annie Mondays.
Well, that's because Toonami stole the thunder, and you knew it.
Actually, here's the thing with Anime Mondays that came afterwards. After Anime Unleashed on G4, and actually no, it was back when that came out when it was Tech TV.
Oh God, Tech TV! Jesus Christ, you're taking me back, man! Holy shit! I remember back when X-Play was good. Holy fuck!
Oh God!
You remember when Adam Sessler wasn't on coke?
Back when it was Extreme Play.
No, yeah, it was Extreme Play.
Way back in the day. I'm an old fucking man.
I remember when it was GameSpot TV when they had the chunkier redhead instead of Morgan.
You wanted to take a ride on that Harley, didn't you, boy?
Yeah. I also wanted to, ride Miss Cat that when she was on a Call for Help.
Oh, we know that Nope likes him thick. There we go. Solve that mystery.
Man, they really missed the boat with the whole Let's Play and streaming thing. They'd gotten on that.
There may have been hope.
Yeah.
But the problem is G4 was retarded. I mean, these are the same people who said, oh, Mega 64? Yeah, go fuck yourself. Oh, but instead of putting Mega 64 on the air, we're going to do another season of Fast Lanes, and we're going to fuck over Martin Sargent.
Ninja Warrior.
Damn good thing I'm drinking right now.
Same.
Although I'm enjoying a nice wine slushy instead of the hard stuff.
Is that why that clinking has been?
Yeah, that was me turning the fucking wine around with the goddamn spoon. Because I don't have any fucking straws here.
All I've known is that I seem to have missed the boat on a lot of TV, and yet I never felt like I missed anything because I was too busy playing video games.
Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 was good. Babylon 5 was fucking awesome. I love that show.
Yeah, but once again, Babylon 5 is one of the reasons why Sci-Fi Channel kind of went down the fucking tubes, because it really seems like they spent a metric fuck ton of money getting the rights to do Babylon 5 shit, and they just couldn't fucking make it work for them.
But keep in mind, they put in a female executive who had no interest in running the channel for its core.
How funny it is that that's the same fate that befell TSR before Wizards of the Coast snapped them up.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my God. It's like there's a fucking pattern here or something. Holy shit.
Well, but you see, the exception is, the problem is because they hire them because they want to put in the pussy pedestal in the office, and you go, why? It's like, we have this woman who could do this job quite perfectly, and she knows what she's doing. No. We need this outsider. Why?
Guys, I got a radical idea. Why not, instead of having these women manage companies, we put them in charge of managing the home instead.
Misogynist.
You horrible fucking sexist, Rain. How dare you?
Hey, you can talk all that shit you want, but we wouldn't have Empire Strike Back if it weren't for an old Yiddish woman.
Hey, you fucking got me there. You absolutely fucking got me
there.
We wouldn't have some of the best fucking episodes of Star Trek if it weren't for, some fucking woman. I can't remember her name.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's not about them being a woman, man. It's about them being involved in the shit. Lee Brackett, I think I've been pronouncing it Lay for the longest fucking time. I think I'm wrong on that, but Lay Brackett wrote pulps. She wrote space opera and shit for the pulp magazines back in the day. And then they hire her to do The Empire Strikes Back, and it's just fucking amazing. It's one of the best movies in the entire series. It's not about having a woman there. It's about having a woman who knows what she's fucking doing, or a person who knows what they're fucking doing. It doesn't matter what sex they are, or what race they are, or any of that stupid bullshit.
What I was gonna note is that, in the TRS situation, that was because, from what I remember, she was the niece of the dude who had the Flash Gordon, so she had to be there as part of contractual obligations. And this woman did not understand the business she was in whatsoever.
Fucking nepotism strikes again.
She thought fucking playtesting was just the guys wasting time instead of pushing the product out. I mean, for fuck's sake.
Honestly, that explains a lot about D&D right now.
And that's also the era where all the worst products from TRS back in the TSR back in the day, fucking leave me alone, okay? Anyway, it's where the worst of their product lines ever came out, where it's nothing really works, everything's garbage. Oh, but it has Flash Gordon on it. This is why.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's
with
fine.
Laughing. I was just looking at I'm watching the chat, and JD Cohen said that Gene Roddenberry is her name.
Actually, I was about to say, let's not. One good thing that came out of the Flash Gordon,
fucking right though.
Sorry, no. The one thing that came out of the Buck Rogers license though were the SSI video games.
I'll be right back.
But then again, the SSI video games were for the Buck Rogers TSR license had pretty insane plots. One where you have to lead your team to fight an evil short Napoleon-esque guy who's going to build a new French empire on Earth. Literally, that's one of the random plots out of those games.
That's funny.
But honestly, I'm gonna say one of my guilty pleasures is one of the things I've kind of tossed around some of my random notebooks is an idea of one of the things I kind of liked about the idea for the original Buck Rogers series is I do like the fact that you have Mongolians with Mongolian war futuristic Mongolian warriors with jetpacks. Mm-hmm. I can't deny that. You can't deny that that's a really cool image.
Yeah, actually, it really fucking is.
It is. Come on, you can't deny that. It's that is totally cool. It's kind of I'm gonna throw
fast.
But how can it be racist? They're the space book, the future Mongolians in the original Buck Rogers series had all sorts of access to technology and stuff, and they had jetpacks, and they had automated cities, and lots of cool tech stuff, you know? And then most likely their emperor, if he was done today, would just be like a really like suave Chinese guy in a three-piece suit. He would most likely be played by Chow Yun-fat, you know? After he's done the whole last emperor shtick walking down through the Forbidden City, he takes off that jacket, puts on a three-piece suit, goes upstairs, and just reads through, you know, a room full of like ticker tape numbers, you know, stating how much they've conquered the solar system this week, you know. And now you must remember, we have to, in order to take over this you know, the Mount that was Olympus Mons on Mars, we will have to make extreme cutbacks in the dumpling budget this week. Please make sure you replace all meat with nothing but paper.
But like we've kind of gotten like way into the fucking weeds. One of the reasons that I wanted to bring JD on, and maybe we can do a stream with him later, because like Flawed says, we've been going on for about 2 hours now. But
yeah, it's pretty late.
One of the things that I wanted to bring him on about was like the manga thing. The manga thing is actually ridiculous. And Grames, you put a link in the PulpRev group chat earlier. A link to an 8chan board about manga blowing up.
Oh yeah.
And I think that like American comics kind of need to take lessons from certain places, because specifically so far as like Cape Comics go, like DC and Marvel, they really need to look at a manga series like My Hero Academia and take notes from that, because I've been like keeping up with comics for the past couple of years, and you know, vicariously reading or actually going out and buying some of these new comics, and it's just just really bad shit. And then I go and I read the My Hero Academia, you know, manga, and it's just like, this is precisely what I fucking wanted. This is Spider-Man in the 90s. This is Captain America. This the shit right here.
He wants his frog waifu. That's what it is.
Hey, who would, you know who does it better? You know, the Pakistani Miss Marvel, or the fact that all the Pakistani chicks want to be the frog lady. They all want to be the frog lady, because Froppy is a legit hero, but she's also a very feminine character. In fact, all the female heroes pretty much are, you know?
Yeah, like Gravity Girl, and they even have a fucking dominatrix superhero in that. Yeah, in that series.
I have never seen this show.
But no, the show is fucking awesome.
Watch it, Bill.
But so far as the comics go, like while I'm reading this manga and I'm thinking about like American superhero comics, it's just like this is where it went. Like once I keep saying this, when American culture starts to devolve and deteriorate into just straight bullshit, like the rap scene went to like trap music and shit like that.
It makes me really angry. Yeah.
It went to fucking Mexico. And the Mexicans are doing the really badass hardcore rap music right now. And then like when rock music starts to become too commercialized and you started seeing bands like Nickelback show up, you look at Japan, and Japan has a really thriving, you know, good music scene with a lot of hardcore metal and just punk and all kinds of other shit, just like genre mixes that people in America have never even thought of before. And it's the same thing with these comic books. When American comics forgot about what they were, the spirit went to Japan. And this guy who'd read a lot of American comic books wrote a fucking comic book story, and he's doing a superhero comic, and he's doing it better than like every single person who's writing comics in America right now.
Actually, and it's absolutely hold up. Have you read Scarlet Spidey?
No. Which run are we fucking talking about? Because I like Scarlet Spider, but
okay. Chris Yost and Peter David.
Is that the new one? I haven't seen a lot of Scarlet Spider around there.
Peter David is the current run right now, and Peter David is probably one of the better writers that have been into the industry for since the fucking 80s. I mean, he's the guy who took over Bill Manilow's run on the Hulk and ran that shit for well over a fucking decade.
No, I haven't seen that yet. I'm gonna have to look it up though. Now that you're recommending it,
yeah, definitely read Peter David's run on Scarlet Spider, and definitely read Chris Yost's run.
Because one of the things I was gonna say is that was kind of the weird thing with. What's strange is I look back at my comics collection, and the dirty secret is when I was a kid, I liked the superhero comics, but I ended up falling towards manga and a lot more of the independent guys or people like Jim Starlin. No, sorry, well, no, not Sterling. Starlin. Ah,
we are not promoting that fat tub of shit.
Yes, no.
I want to know why you are bringing my good name into this, sir.
and the reason why I say this is because I for a while I had a full run of Dreadstar. When they reprinted it in black and white, and my gosh, I was like, the problem is I was reading things like Dreadstar. I was reading stuff like Frank Miller's, like the first comic series I ever collected. It ain't Spider-Man. It ain't. Well, actually, the first comic that I may have actually bought was like for like $1 or so, and it was like a special issue where they were selling Superboy. Another comic that I ended up getting when I was a young kid for myself was one time in which Superman had to save Bizarro World. This is prior to Crisis. And for a while, I had read other people's comics, but there was something about the superhero comics was kind of missing. But when I, with Prisoners of Gravity, I was like, realized, wait, there's all these other comics I've never heard of? American Flag? What the? And it's like, it was so hard to sort of somewhat find them out. But in turn, it's kind of like the first comic series I willfully bought was like the Martha Washington book, Give Me Liberty by Frank Miller. So, in a weird sense, when I try to go back to in a weird sense, when I sort of went back to the older comics of like the 60s and 70s, I got more of an appreciation for where they were coming from. But it was kind of like, I like these comics in their prime, but it seems to be around about the 80s of the Chris Claremont era at Marvel, especially. It always felt like, with the exception of Spider-Man, or maybe the Punisher, it felt like they didn't let them do anything. Like, it's kind of like I've read, thanks to the Two-Figure Discount, I've had a chance to read ROM, for instance.
Oh, going back to Bill Manilow.
Yeah. And reading that, I'm like going, this is a mind-blowing series that if you were lucky enough to have read it from beginning to end, you got probably one of the few fully serialized and full-fledged stories that took place in the Marvel Universe that legitimately had change and growth with its characters. And even, dealing with all sorts of, with a global conspiracy and all this jazz, and they tied it all in. And the problem was, I always get the feeling that, as a kid growing up, I couldn't get into something like X-Men because X-Men always felt that, Claremont, like the way X-Men should have gone is it should have turned into something like My Hero Academia, where after every few years or so, you get a new roster of students and teachers, right? Because really, there's only so much you could do with the Malcolm X, Martin Luther quote-unquote analogy. That analogy wasn't there when Stan Lee first started it. It was Chris Claremont that kind of sold that idea. But that story can only go so far. And eventually when you're done with that, you have to go with the growth aspect and just admit, okay, mutants exist. The Marvel Universe works best when you let the craziness happen. When you let the Kirby crackle out of the box.
When you just say, fuck it, bitch, we going to space.
Yes. When you have Spider-Man accidentally swinging around, say, Galactus' lair with Silver Surfer, and half the time he's kind of baffled about what the heck he's...
What was that? Are you fiddling with your mic cord or something?
You pressed the mute button.
Oh, that wasn't me.
No, it was.
But,
it sounds like you're fiddling with your mic cord or something.
It was him.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I probably actually.
I kind of want to chime in with because you brought in comics. Your first comics when you brought up you spent your lunch money on. Me, I had the misfortune of being a kid in the fucking 90s with comics. Now there were a lot of cool shit. There was a lot of fucking great ass cartoons on TV. There were some baller ass toys and video games, but oh dear fucking God. If I wanted to read comics, I had to go to the back issues. I mean, the one thing I remember, one question I asked my dad, because he would always, every month, he would go to the fucking comic store, pick up an issue of Spidey, and just bitch relentlessly about how shit the book was. And I remember asking him, saying, "Hey, Dad, if the book was so shit, why do you keep buying it?" Dad's like, "Well, it's kind of like checking in on a friend who's dying of cancer." Was his response. That was my dad. That was my dad's explanation to a 7-year-old Bill.
Yeah, your dad was pretty fucking base, dude.
Nah, he beat the shit out of me like a fucking dog. He was an asshole. But still.
he had his
good
moments
taste in comics, but yeah, he had some good moments of parrying every once in a while, but he was a kid that wasn't ready to have fucking kids. But point being, so armed with the information that most comics that my dad were buying were shit, I said, fuck it, I'm gonna go into the back issues. First book I actually pulled out that wasn't, recommended to me by Dad, aka Kraven's Last Hunt, was Jim Starlin's run on Captain Marvel, where he actually fought the Thing. It was baller shit and gave me a complete introduction to the concept of Cosmic Marvel before I even had a chance to actually sit down and read the John Buscema run of Silver Surfer or any of the old classic shit. And then you
totally missed out on the Clone Saga.
No, I didn't. I heard my dad bitch about it every fucking month. Fuck is this shit? What do you mean Peter Parker's the clone? There was an action issue back in the day when Peter had just got done throwing the clone into the fucking smokestack at Shea Stadium right after he was in a fight with Doc Ock. He was thinking, oh, fuck, it's over. I don't even know if I'm the real Peter Parker anymore. Oh, I'm going to miss Aunt May. I'm going to miss Harry. I'm going to miss Mary Jane. Hey, wait a minute, Mary Jane. If I were the clone, I would be, whining about Gwen. Shit, I am the real deal. And then Peter...
Actually, I'll do one step better. My favorite Spider-Man run for that time period. Once again, anytime I kind of liked Marvel, it was always the wackier one-offs. Spider-Man's Canadian tour. Oh, yes. The best. Seriously. There was a series
Does he meet Justin Trudeau?
No, he doesn't.
This has got to be back in the 80s or some shit.
No, this was like around about the early 90s. They were giving away a series of free comics, which later on were printed in the run, where Spider-Man is like, Jason's like, Spider-Man, you're gonna follow some sport kids in Kazakhstan. Here. Actually, I don't have to pay you very much because you're being paid in American dollars. You can just cross the border and you'll be able to, buy up half of Kingston or something for like $50. So
I can actually see Jameson giving that kind of explanation.
Yes. And so he goes through a series of adventures, and they're actually linked up with the main
Alpha Flight
comics line. First of all, well, actually, I think he encountered that later on, but basically, first of all, he ends up having a fight with Harry Osborn at the Montreal Olympic Stadium with the Expo kids because there was another storyline about Harry Osborn, I think, losing one of his kids at the time because they sort of revealed, because it was found out that he was kind of the Green Goblin or something. And he wanted revenge on Spider-Man. There was another one where Electro did something that I wish more sane mutant villains would do. it was a 2-part story where he was running a drug smuggling ring, moving pharmaceuticals to resell them on the open drug market through hockey pucks. I am not making this up. this is
that's fucking brilliant.
You know, I mean, that it's one of those moments where, if I was writing X-Men at the time, I just have like the guest appearance with Electro, and he's like, taking the piss out of like Magneto, going, "Well, Magneto, this is why I'm able to afford bail. You could have built Asteroid M years ago if you just sold drugs." What's wrong with you? Look at the Kingpin. He makes billions a year just selling cocaine. And then Apocalypse himself, he runs an entire. Did you know that the Mole Man is able to fund his subterranean operations because he sells all the weed on the East Coast?
and then you get to do the cool arc about Kingpin getting pissed because they're horning in on his territory.
I would actually pay to see something like that. If Marvel actually say, you know what, fuck it, we're gonna do something like this, I'd be like, okay, here you go, Bob. There you go. Here's my money. Just I mean, seriously.
This is a real this should typify like just crystallize the problem with the American comics industry right now is that 3 fucking randos in some live stream in the ass end of nowhere of the internet are coming up with better story ideas for comic books than the guys who are actually working on the fucking comic books right now.
Well, it's kind of like Superman is in fact like Wonder Woman. They're the easiest characters to actually write for. But what they keep screwing up is you get people like Bryan Singer who are like, I want to get to the heart and soul of this character. Whereas it's like...
he's a dude from fucking Kansas. That's it. That's Clark Kent in a nutshell. Yeah. He's an old-fashioned country bumpkin from bumfuck nowhere, Kansas, who had a decent mom and dad that raised him with some decent basic fucking manners, who went to school to fucking do journalism and moved to the city. That's it. Clark is the guy who when he's done with the Daily Planet, at his desk job, he's like, okay, I'm gonna go fly around Metropolis, see if there's anything going on.
I mean, I will admit that there are certain things that, like, Superman is not one of my favorite. I don't like Superman as a character, but there have been certain snippets of comic books that I have really liked, and I don't know which run they came from, but there's one particular scene that sticks out in my mind that I really enjoyed watching. Was it's Superman and the Flash playing chess, and they're playing like hyper speed chess because Superman's like the only guy who can keep up with the Flash. And Superman, I can't remember who was on which side of the argument, but they were having a debate about gun control. And I want to say Superman was like, well, let's just take all of the guns. And, we could do it. We're fucking superheroes. Who would stop us? And they're sitting there playing chess while they're doing this. And the chess metaphor.
I'm going to say it was probably Flash that said that, because Superman's always been the one that says, no, we probably shouldn't do that.
Well, whoever it was, that's the person that started winning the chess games. And eventually, I want to say it was the Flash who was taking like the libertarian stance in the argument. But, just for purposes of argument right now, I might be fucked up on this, but let's say Superman was the guy doing the gun control argument. Well, why don't we just take all of the guns? And then Flash was like, okay, so we take all of the guns. What then? Check. And they keep going on this argument, and the Flash keeps bringing up all of this stuff like, well, what about cigarettes? Why don't we just ban cigarettes and stop people from smoking? It's unhealthy. It's bad for them. Why don't we just take all of the cigarettes away? We have the power. Why not? And then he kind of broke down how, like, taking that one step leads you into this totalitarian mindset. Because you have the power, you can do it, doesn't mean you should. Yeah. And that kind of stuff, I like seeing that stuff in comics, but then I recognize that I'm older. I like arguments about that kind of stuff. You know, this isn't the kind of shit, like a little kid, a 10-year-old kid isn't going to want to see Superman and the Flash playing chess, debating about like gun control and shit.
Yeah. Okay, hold on, Jim. One thing, the Flashpoint. Have you seen the Flashpoint movie or read the books?
No,
okay, it's basically the Flash goes back in time and stops his mother from dying, and then that screws up everything. Batman now instead of Bruce Wayne watching his parents die, now Bruce Wayne is shot and his father turns into Batman and his mother turns into the Joker, and it's just really crazy.
I remember hearing about this shit.
You got to see this movie.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Actually, fuck the movie. Read that particular 3-issue story. That was probably the highlight of Flashpoint.
But anyway, something like that. I think something that a kind of argument like that of, you know, if you have the power to time travel, should you go back in time and, you know, save stuff? That could work better because, like, you know, because if you're a little kid, you have your parents, and hopefully, and you could think, well, something happened to one of them, you'd want to be able to change that, but then the moral of the Flashpoint story is that maybe that isn't, you know, for the best.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. With comic audience, you have potential for a wide age range for your audience. You could have, you know, your 5-year-old kid that can tell you all about how maniacal Dr. Doom is. And you could also have, you know, his pops telling you, yeah, Doom is pretty fucking baller. I mean, and because I remember for a while, Marvel was actually putting out a more quote unquote family affair when it came to some of their titles, like Fantastic Four, for example. It was played up more like a straight up family adventure shit, as the way it should be.
Oh yeah, but now they don't want to promote the family unit. These people want to destroy the family unit. Let's get that straight.
Yeah, even Comic Book Girl 19 on YouTube is one of those fucking moonbats.
I mean, I don't disagree with you on that's what they're trying to do. But like I remember a lot of cartoons that I used to watch in the 90s, right? And like 90s kid and shit. But right. Like when you look at all these old cartoons, stuff like Invader Zim or even stuff like the Rugrats, you know, they had a lot of shit in those cartoons. Or like Rocko's Modern Life. There was a lot of shit in those cartoons that kids are not going to get. But they're gonna sit there and they're gonna watch the cartoon because it's wacky cartoon hijinks, and then you have those moments that the kids don't understand that are there specifically built in for the adults who are going to watch this series. And I think that you can do the same thing with comics. I think that you can have commentary on all of these huge issues in the world, but you don't have to do it in a way that brings the issue to the forefront. You can still make it entertaining for children. You know what I mean?
Well,
no, fingerprints.
Here's the thing, you know, kids aren't stupid.
None of you watched Animaniacs?
Yes.
Animaniacs is a perfect example.
And along with Rocko's Modern Life, along with shit like even Batman, or, you know, good examples of, you know, quote unquote social commentary, or that after school special, which you and I are more familiar with back in the day, would be episodes of Gargoyles that were talking about, you know, gun safety. Where Patrick accidentally shot, you know, that chick. I can't remember her name.
I can't remember her fucking name. We all know who you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know,
with the red jacket. Yeah.
I mean, you had, but even shows like Gargoyles, they didn't have, you know, when they did shit like that, they didn't, you know, ham fist the story. They didn't, you know, try and turn it into a soapbox affair. They still managed to make it entertaining for everybody involved. Fuck, even books back in the 70s like Green Lantern, Green Arrow, were able to stay on point with their plot and keep everyone, fucking entertained while trying to, make some quote unquote relevant commentary.
Well, this is why I wanted to get JD in on the conversation, because he says in the chat, action and adventure appeals to all ages. As long as that's the base, you can do anything else.
Thank you. Right, if you know how to fucking write, you got this shit. I mean, that's the whole point here. I mean, these fucking hacks at Marvel and DC are not interested in telling a story. They're not interested in character development. They're interested in checking off a few boxes for their characters, and then ranting and raving about their political ideology. That's it. Oh, and if you talk shit about their book being crap, you're racist. You just hate women. I bet you're Gamergate or
you just hate fucking trans people. No, Mags, we don't hate trans people. We hate you because you're a crap writer.
Exactly. I mean, shit, I'd tap the trap. So I don't really actually not no more.
Are you down with the liberalist trap no state?
I can they can have their own little trap no state.
Well,
they need Asteroid M. That's what they fucking need.
No, it's true. How are they supposed to actually have a state if they can't reproduce?
Exactly.
You're gonna have to ask Andy Worski about that when he's the guy.
Hold on, wait a minute. We have artificial wombs now. That's the thing.
I think the best part about but where are they gonna get the eggs from?
We can genetically modify that shit in the lab.
No, I mean, where are they going to get the eggs from? Where are they going to get the
Apparently
eggs
you can from skin cells.
Boom.
Ooh.
I've heard about that, but apparently it's like really fucking involved and it's not perfected yet. So it's like
give it a decade or two.
Give it a decade or two. That kind of shit's up in the air right now.
All over again.
Brave New World. Let's do this.
Yeah, you wish for Brave New World, but you don't even get 1984. No, you just get the movie Brazil.
I'm also
need to fucking read
ironically, Brazil is probably the most realistic take on the whole thing due to bureaucracy and overall government incompetence.
And all that high-tech Apple gloss, and you pop over the inside, and it's a disgusting mess of wires and pipes that nobody knows what it's supposed to do or why.
But JD, if 2D girls were real, then they wouldn't be pure 2D girls.
He's got you there, fam.
They would be 3D PG. Can't have that.
Oh shit. Let's bring him on here for until midnight, and then we all crash out like bitches. Early
that works.
All right, cool.
I mean, Templar, it's obvious, isn't going to come back.
Yeah, poor Templar. Rip in peace, homie.
Yeah.
Carl!
Oh, he's back. I don't know if he can say anything.
Carl!
You need to get your fucking internet fixed, homie.
Dude, I know the struggle. I'm basically here through the will of Zeus.
Oh, boy.
Hey, anyone used to read webcomics?
Yeah, I was a homosexual at one point.
I remember I used to read some web comics.
I read Mega Tokyo, Post Nuke, and I think strong female character.
Actually, I remember reading Mega Tokyo, and the few times I ever glimpsed at it, I was like,
it never went anywhere.
That is the joke.
Yeah, I kind of.
The chat is calling for flawed intellect to come on.
Well, we're almost done.
Oh, okay. So all right. We'll get you guys next time.
Yeah. What? Yeah, JD, I want to argue with you about why Sony's anime is better than 80s and 90s. So, what day do you want to do that?
I want to stoke the fire on that shit.
Good, guys. Good.
I'll bet you he hasn't even watched Galaxy Express 39. Get this man out of here.
Out.
or the original Space Cruiser Yamato, or Captain Harlock. And there's no excuse because you can now buy the entire first series of Captain Harlock on DVD, and that's something I would recommend everybody watch.
I legit,
I'll do even better. The original '60s Astro Boy. That is the show that kept me from drifting away from science fiction. Like when I was trying to get into reading the short story magazines like Clark's World and just finding it boring garbage.
Because it is.
Yeah.
To be honest.
I kind of drifted away. I started to drift away then, and then I went and watched the original Astro Boy from the '60s, and it's like, wait, hold on, this is actually good.
Yeah,
holy shit! Science fiction actually has something to contribute besides being boring vehicles for fucking political ideologies. Oh my god!
I'm sorry. I tried watching the original Harlock. I really did. I stopped watching when there was a scene where there was like a massive earthquake or some shit, an explosion, and this kid just, holy shit, Templar replicated. I'm not the only one seeing this, right?
No, I can see it too. That's fucking weird.
Oh shit, there's two of them.
Can you guys watch and see it?
Now we're all fucked.
Yeah, exactly. It's ogre. It's all ogre. But still, like I said, there was a scene where there was an explosion or some shit, and this fucking little kid is about to fall to her death, and then out of fucking nowhere, a little tornado just props up and carries her down. I'm like, what the fuck, huh?
But you gotta understand, it's Captain Harlock is next to Galaxy Express 39. It's the second most fairy tale-esque Leiji Matsumoto show that's out there, especially the first series. But it's self-contained.
Yeah, and basically then you watch Endless Odyssey, and you're like, oh fuck.
And it's basically a story about a group of space romantics that kind of give a damn about humanity against basically socialist Earth that is letting its own people just get invaded and with an incompetent bureaucracy that can do jack. And their only solution
were more of the, in that, if I remember correctly, that government was more of a bitch to the military.
Yeah. But it was
socialism in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep. It's a sort of show that if Davis Aridi watched it, his mind would be blown. It's like, wait, are you telling me that the Japanese people were complaining about this shit in the 70s in their own country? Yes. And it's a nice companion piece, I would say, to another series you should watch, which is Battles Without Honor and Humanity. You watch the first film, and you can choose to watch the others if you want. But basically, it's a story about how the Yakuza helped, a bunch of war-torn men come back from World War II to help build the Japanese economy, and then the Japanese economy decides to politely dispose of them at the end of the 70s. At the mid-70s. It's a damn good series of films.
Yeah, one thing, if you know where to look, you can see certain posier elements in Japanese culture. Like the first episode of Midnight Diner would be one thing to check out if you want to see an example of it. I mean, it's better done than anything you're going to get here. Like it's an entertaining show, but you can kind of,
Well, I'm gonna say something here, Rain. There was the arts community in Japan in the 70s and 60s sort of fell under the same sway of communism as it did in so many other places in the globe, which is a tragedy, really. But that it's just kind of the way these things sort of shake out. Artistic people who don't have a good sense for business magically assume that, why? Well, I'm an artist. Why can't the government just give me money for this? And it's like, well, you can earn
because you suck.
Yeah,
it should be the automatic. I would love to see a department actually showing up, set up for all these fucking lefty moonbats to say, "Oh, wow, we're finally going to get paid to do nothing and put out sub quality crap," and then they'll go there and fill out the form in triplicate, have it signed, and then lost, and then rediscovered, and then recycled, and then finally they get the phone call, and there's a simple, "No, we're not giving you money." Why? Because you're crap. You can't write, you can't draw, you have no sense of story structure, you have no basic command of the human anatomy. You're
Bill,
there's a simple
way to say this. It's like what Pave Darko was saying. You just tell them no. Okay, these people, their parents never told them no. Their teachers never told them no.
What you do is you take Harlan Ellison's brain, put it in a jar, and then hook it up to a machine that basically just talks shit about him. Why isn't my book selling? Because it's shit! You want your books to sell, stop writing shit! That's what he told JMS.
Any other thoughts?
Traps are definitely gay.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, if they got titties, that's cool. I mean, you can grab them, but just as long as you acknowledge you're fucking, you're fucking.
No, I'm sorry, that's a girl.
Nah, that's pretty gay, homie. If you're
are we gonna get into the fucking D tier Fuda discourse right now?
Okay, let's do this. Why the fuck not? Break it. If you're willing to go down and
no, man, the liquor store is not open right now. I don't.
If you gotta go south, if you're gonna go south of the border and swallow a sword, and you yourself gotta.
If I draw a picture of a cat and then I call it a raccoon, does that mean it's a raccoon?
No, it's a fucking cat.
Jesus Christ.
See, exactly.
Exactly. So
if you draw a picture of a girl, you can't just say, "Well, it's a guy." No, it's a girl. Now, granted, if you draw a picture of a guy, then sure, it's a guy. But
in short, traps are gay. Get over it.
Exactly. I'm sorry, but that's kind of the it's if it's got a dick, and if you're willing, if there's something you gotta swallow, if you gotta swallow a sword while grabbing your titties.
You're assuming that they drew that part.
Why wouldn't you?
If the character's fully dressed, then you wouldn't.
Yeah, but then he's gonna whip out that cock.
So basically, you're making the argument that Felix Argyle is a woman.
Yes.
Okay. Just so I know.
I mean, sure, there's fan art drawing Felix Argyle as a guy. Clearly, I'm not going to deny that. But
no hips, no tips.
Do they have a pair of tits?
What about what's her name? Taiga from Toradora. Does that character constitute as male?
I have no idea who the.
Okay, let me think of an example.
No, really though. Like as an aside, you should go watch Toradora because it's legitimately one of the best anime romance stories out there. Just saying, like it's a really fucking good show. Traps and Fuda and shit like that aside, Toradora is really good. If you haven't watched it, you should go watch it.
It's on Steam. Yeah. I think the price for it's pretty good, especially on sale. So
why is a video game service showing doing this? What the fuck?
Oh yeah, there's loads and loads of videos on Steam now.
That's a whole other fucking argument. Yeah, Flaud's right. Taiga is definitely a female.
Well, I guess that's a good place as any to end it.
All right.
Good night, everybody. Make sure you go down the highway, not across the street, if you really want to see results. Take care, my friends.
Good night, everyone.
Peace, everybody.